Chapter 61. Entering the Grand Route. Robin was the first to return, leading a team of porters alongside the Ghost Shadow's own stewards. Together, they lugged fresh water and provisions down to the ship's hold, every barrel and crate filling our cabin to the brim. As I passed the naval outpost on the dock, I paused to survey the men-at-arms assembled there, sailors and Marines alike, and wondered if they'd take this chance to give us trouble. On deck, Rhodes reclined casually against the guardrail. Without looking up, he called out, "Don't worry, they wouldn't dare interfere with us." Robin paused in her supervision of the unloading below and glanced over at him. A wry smile curved her lips as she leaned thoughtfully on one elbow. "Perhaps they won't," she agreed, "but word of our arrival has already reached the Navy's headquarters. Their seasoned troops are amassing along the Grand Route. This outpost likely won't move against us, but the real flak awaits further down the line." I nodded, feeling a surge of anticipation. Beyond the harbor lay the Grand Route, a perilous stretch where the Navy's most formidable forces stood ready. With our supplies secure and our crew on edge, we were one step closer to facing whatever lay ahead. Nethan couldn't help but grin at Robin's gentle reminder. He turned back to her, waggled a finger, and playfully tickled her chin. "I still can't figure it out," he teased. "If the Navy wants to make arrangements, let them take their time." Robin showed no sign of embarrassment. Instead, she tilted her head and returned his gaze with a knowing smile. Nethan held her look for a few more seconds, then diverted his eyes toward the distant horizon. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "it's already the end of November in the 11th year of the Great Pirate Era. If I'm not mistaken, you'll turn 17 on February 6th, only 2.5 months from now. After that, you really won't have any excuse left to call yourself a lowly." Robin's smile faltered as she searched his face, sure there was a second, unspoken half to his sentence, some deeper meaning he'd chosen to withhold. But Nethan offered no more, and she could only wonder what he was thinking. 30 minutes later, Lafitte reappeared on deck. With a casual flick of his wrist, he produced a curious device that looked something like a pocket watch, only instead of a flat dial, it housed a small crystal sphere with a single slender pointer floating inside. "Here it is, Captain," Lafitte announced, holding the instrument out for Nethan to inspect. Nethan took the small device from Lafitte's hand, studied it for a moment, then nodded. "This will serve instead of charts and a compass on the Great Route." Rhodes returned the instrument to Lafitte for safekeeping. Over the next half-day, the crew filled the Ghost Shadow's hold with fresh water and provisions. At Rhodes's command, they cast off from Bellowstown's pier, unfurled the sails, and set their course straight for Upside Down Mountain. As soon as the Ghost Shadow slipped beyond the breakwater, the town's naval squadron radioed the news back to Admiralty headquarters, but Rhodes paid the report no heed. Day by day, they approached the legendary waterway, known as the Great Route. The weather grew capricious, sea currents shifted without warning, and the swells rose into turbulent rollers. Below the surface, hidden undercurrents clawed at the hull. On deck, Rhodes and Lafayette kept watch, hands on the tiller and eyes on the device that guided them. Despite the doldrum's dead calms and sudden squalls, they held their course true, using every puff of wind and every surge of wave to forge onward toward Upside Down Mountain. The planet is divided by the Great Route and the Red Earth continent into 4 seas, east, west, north, and south. The currents from each sea converge at a single point, surge up the slopes of Reverse Mountain, and then pour into the Great Route. Drawing on his memory, Nethan watched those swirling waters with steady confidence. Although this was the West Sea, not the Stant Sea that Luffy and the others once sailed, it was merely its mirror image. Through the morning mist, a vast expanse of crimson land materialized on the horizon, the Red Earth continent. Robin leaned on the deck rail, her eyes shining as she took in the sight. "It's even more spectacular than I ever imagined," she whispered. "The Red Earth continent." Lafitte's lips curved into an odd half-smile, but his restless eyes betrayed a swell of excitement. Around him, the crew fell into awed silence. Even Rhodes, staring at the scarlet cliffs that cleaved the world in two, felt his heart race. Nothing he remembered could compare to this breathtaking spectacle. Nethan stood at the Ghost Shadow's rail, gazing toward the red soil continent. Beyond its rust-colored plains lay the twin arcs of the Great Route. At one end towered the upside-down mountain, gateway to the first half of the voyage and terminus of the second. Far beyond, shrouded in mist, hovered the final isle of Ralph Drew. Even if a ship could cut straight through the windless belt and follow the back half of the route, without the centuries-old road maps carved into stone, no navigator could ever spot that hidden island. Nethan tilted his head, curiosity flickering for only a moment. Rumors called the prize hidden there, One Piece, but he felt no hunger for treasure, only mild intrigue. Satisfied, he turned his attention back to the ship. As the ghost shadow drew nearer to the upside-down mountain, the sea around it seethed. A violent countercurrent whipped through the narrow channel, crashing against the hull and threatening to sweep them off course. Rhodes and Lafitte moved as one, with Rhodes calling out orders to the helmsman and Lafitte trimming the sails. They guided the ghost shadow into the heart of the reverse stream. The ship shuddered under the water's wrath, but their seamanship held firm. Inch by inch, they clawed their way upward, the mountain's jagged cliffs looming overhead. Then, with a final heave, the ghost shadow burst free of the current's grip. Ahead lay an open expanse, the beginning of the Great Route. The journey had truly begun. High atop Upside-Down Mountain, just beyond the Twin Gorges lighthouse, old Kulokas sat in the warm morning sun, a folded newspaper resting on his lap. As the lighthouse's caretaker and ship's doctor to Roger, the Pirate King, he'd seen countless vessels slip into that winding canal over the years. Today his attention snapped to the waterway, where a sleek black hull raced toward the wide expanse of the Great Route. It was the Ghost Shadow, flagship of the Ghost Hand Pirates, another ragtag crew hoping to carve out a name for themselves. Kulokas had read every dispatch about them, their daring raids, whispered ambitions, and the young captain at their helm. He knew only that they were fresh to these waters, just one more group of hopefuls launching from this very spot. He let out a low chuckle and folded his newspaper. 11 years he'd watched ships depart, and he'd seen almost none return in glory. Whether the Ghost Hand Pirates would prosper or vanish into legend remained to be seen. A few days later, word of the Ghost Hand Pirates' departure from the West Sea and their entry into the Grand Line spread like wildfire. Across every port and harbor, naval officers and rival crews alike exhaled in relief. Yet all their gazes were fixed on the perilous waters ahead. For over a decade, the Grand Line, known ominously as the Pirate's Grave, had claimed countless legendary captains, many boasting bounties of 70 to 80 million berries. Now the fearsome Ghost Hand Pirates had sailed into that same gauntlet. Would they be swept away like so many before them, or would they harness the very storms of the Grand Line and rise to dominate these deadly seas? No one dared predict the outcome. Chapter 62, Tempest. The sea had turned into a roiling mass of whitecaps and spray, each wave threatening to swallow the Ghost Shadow whole. The deck pitched and yawed so violently that even the hardiest sailors struggled to keep their footing. How long until we sight land? Lafitte's voice cut through the gale as he barked orders to Robin. Stretching her limbs across the deck, Robin twisted and reshaped the sails in midair, using her devil fruit power to catch every errant gust. Below her, deckhands strained at the ropes, their knuckles white as they fought to steady the rigging. Lafitte, drenched from head to toe, glanced at the log pose clipped to his wrist. "It's impossible to predict," he shouted. "I've never sailed these waters before. These currents and squalls are nothing like I've ever seen. We've drifted well off our charted course." "Not to worry," Nethan called from the companionway, stepping onto the trembling deck. The wind snapped at his coat, but he planted himself firmly, eyes locked on the horizon. "Just keep that log pose pointed in the same direction. We'll hit an island eventually." "Which one?" "I don't know. There are at least half a dozen possible routes through here, and most of them won't lead us to the Straw Hats." Robin creased her brow, but didn't hesitate. "Then we follow the course. There's no turning back." She gave a final tug on the halyard, and the sails snapped taut. A jagged bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the Ghost Shadow in stark relief. Thunder rattled the mast, and the ship lurched down the face of a towering wave. Lafitte gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles bled, but he managed to steer them through the trough. Nethin let the storm's fury wash over him. This was the new world in all its unpredictable glory, and they would press on, no matter what lay ahead. In the heart of the raging storm, a 20-meter wall of water rose out of the fog, as if the heavens themselves had tipped over. It bore down on the ghost shadow with terrifying speed. "Brace yourselves," Lafitte shouted, his face paling. Nico Robin, powerless against such raw force, her devil fruit abilities offering no defense, looked on in horror. At that critical instant, Nethin's hand flew to his waist. He drew his renowned sword, Chunle, and in a heartbeat, summoned his haki to cloak the blade in a fierce, radiant aura. Then, with a single bone-shaking stroke, he struck the onrushing surge. A thunderous crack split the air. The colossal wave shattered from its center, the water roaring apart like a curtain drawn by an invisible hand. The ghost shadow plunged through the cleft, escaping the deluge by mere yards. On the Grand Line, even the most seasoned crews can be undone by its strange, volatile weather, but not when a true powerhouse stands at the helm. Lafitte let out a low whistle. "Remarkable swordsmanship, Captain," he murmured. "Truly worthy of your name." Lafitte's eyes flickered with both respect and admiration as he met Rhodes's gaze. Nethin stood calmly beside them, hands clasped behind his back, his cool appraisal of the situation betraying nothing but satisfaction in his navigator's performance. Under Lafitte's guidance, the ghost shadow had sliced through the churning swell with uncanny precision. But as soon as the ship emerged from the heaviest of the waves, the scene ahead shifted dramatically. Through the fog bank, two ominous shapes took form, one to the port bow, the other to starboard. On the left drifted a battle-scarred pirate galleon. To the right loomed an immense ice floe, easily 100 meters across, its jagged face shimmering with a deathly chill. Robin, posted high in the rigging, was the first to spot them. He hailed down, voice urgent, "Sir, pirates on the port side, and an enormous ice block off the starboard." Before Rhodes could reply, the ocean itself seemed to revolt. A massive undercurrent surged up from the deep, wrapping the ghost shadow in a vicious whirlpool of foam and spray. The ship lurched, and then was flung hard toward the drifting ice. Not far away, the pier, 8 vessels shuddered under the same tumultuous storm. Its tattered sails were laced with holes from sudden hail, and the crew scrambled across the pitching deck. When one lookout caught sight of the ghost shadow veering into view, he staggered back, eyes wide. "Boss!" he cried, reaching for the rail as the pirate ship heaved once more. The first clash was coming. Whether with these cutthroats or the inexorable ice, no one aboard could say. But all knew there was no turning back. Nethin, captain of the pirate ship, stood on deck as rain lashed his face. "There's another vessel out there, a ghost shadow," his lookout cried. Nethin's brow tightened. His own hull was already badly damaged by the storm. He had no appetite for a fight right now. He was about to order a course change when something far more spectacular happened. From beneath the waves came a sudden, powerful undercurrent. It grabbed the ghost shadow, propelling it forward with terrifying speed. Nethin watched, half in disbelief, as the enemy ship, helpless against the surge, hurtled straight into a massive ice block, drifting in the gray sea. The collision rang out like thunder. "Hold steady," Nethin barked. "Watch that same undercurrent. We don't want our hull pinned against ice." He stood back, eyes fixed on the wreck. The ghost shadow slumped against the floe as if it had been crushed by the ice itself, planks splintering under the impact. Perfect. If the ship's bones were broken, it would make a fine prize and a valuable haul of salvage. A slow smile curled at Nethin's lips. Fortune had delivered the enemy to him on a platter. Now it was only a matter of boarding what was left of the ghost shadow and claiming every last piece of it. The storm-howled night was lit only by the jagged moonlight and the furious crack of wind-driven ice. Far ahead, a massive floe, easily 100 meters across, spun toward the ghost shadow, its momentum threatening to crush the little ship like kindling. On the deck of the nameless pirate vessel trailing them, every eye was glued to the oncoming behemoth of ice. Without warning, a lone figure launched himself from the ghost shadow. Nethin soared through the sleet and gale, wings of dark cloak flapping wildly as he angled toward the rolling iceberg. Pirates gaped as he vanished into the tempest. Moments later, he reappeared, descending with inhuman grace to land squarely at the flow's center. Where Nethin's boots met ice, a spiderweb of cracks raced outward. The flow groaned under a twisting force born of his power. First thin fissures, then wide crevasses split the mass from its core. The wind shrieked in triumph. Then, with a thunderous explosion, the great ice block shattered into a blizzard of shards, spraying upward and outward in a sparkling, deadly cloud. Behind him, the ghost shadow streaked in, skimming across the shattered surface without so much as a shudder. Small cubes of ice skittered away beneath its hull as it cut through the chaos to calm seas beyond. And on the shattered floe, Nethin stood alone, cloak swirling in the aftermath, every pirate's astonished gaze fixed upon him. An eerie hush fell over the crew of the nameless pirate ship. Even their captain, renowned across the northern sea with a 13 million berry bounty on his head, stood frozen at the helm. He watched in disbelief as a colossal chunk of ice, torn skyward by the storm, splintered apart against his vessel's stern. That single, hulking shard had the force of an iceberg, and it left him shaking. Through the mist, the ghost shadow emerged, its prow swinging ominously toward them. "Hard to starboard," the captain roared, voice cracking over the howling wind. "All engines full." At the same moment, a fierce undercurrent rose from the abyss beneath the waves. It coiled around the hull like a living thing and swept them clear of the ghost shadow's path. Within seconds, the phantom ship dissolved into the swirling fog. The captain wiped cold sweat from his brow. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "That's enough for today. Set course for Beha." Aye. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crew as they obeyed, turning their ship homeward under gray, brooding skies. Nethin shattered the colossal slab of ice with a single, thunderous blow and stepped back onto the ghost shadow's deck. He watched the pirate vessel, undistinguished and unflagged, struggle in the undercurrent, then slip away into the rolling morning mist. He turned his gaze elsewhere without a second thought. To Nethin, this ragtag band of pirates, roaming the outer fringes of the Great Rote, was nothing more than novice troublemakers, and he was no novice. Engaging them would grant virtually no experience and, at best, a handful of coins. He had better things to do than grind fodder. Instead, he lifted his eyes to a sky that was gradually brightening. The navigational marker on his chart pointed directly to the next waypoint, an unremarkable island marking the first stretch of the Great Rote's eastern current. He hadn't altered course to chase the pirate ship, he'd followed the map, as always. Lafitte, standing at the helm, dipped into a respectful bow. "All set, Captain." "Steady as she goes," Nethin replied. Through weather that shifted from clear sunshine to sudden squalls and even flurries of snow, the ghost shadow cut through turbulent seas. By day's end, they emerged from the storm-racked waters and dropped anchor off the first island of the Great Route, ready to press on into the unknown. Chapter 63, Pruton Town, is the first port on this stretch of the Great Route. Far from chaotic, the town is neat and orderly. When the pirate ship Ghost Shadow slid into the harbor, it caused no stir. The locals were accustomed to such arrivals. On the Great Route, the extraordinary and the mundane blend into everyday life. Captain Rhodes stepped ashore, twirling his red-lacquered cane as he surveyed the quiet streets. His expression remained calm. He paid little mind to whether the island held any surprises. "Our recording pointer must stay grounded here until it's fully charged with magnetic energy," he announced. "Only then can it guide us to the next island. We'll wait until it's done." Lafitte checked the brass and leather device strapped to his wrist. Its single needle quivered but held firm. "Understood, Captain. I'll alert you the moment it's at full capacity." Nethin gave a firm nod. "In the meantime, everyone is free to go ashore and explore." Lafitte's eyes gleamed with excitement as he tapped his cane against the cobblestones and tipped his hat. "Ho, ho, ho, I've been itching to see what Pruton has in store." Robin smiled and said, "I'm curious about this island's history, too." The three of them broke off in town. Robin made for the old archives to dig into the island's past. Lafitte slipped away to investigate a strange tip he'd picked up, and Nethin wandered into a humble noodle shop at random. He settled at a wooden table and ordered the house specialty, a steaming bowl of hand-pulled noodles. Later, down on the pier, a rickety warehouse door creaked open. A man strode inside and flipped the light switch. Yellow bulbs flickered to life, revealing a cluttered hall strewn with empty bottles, overturned chairs, and half-dressed dancers slumped against the walls. The air reeked of stale liquor. The newcomer clapped his hands and bellowed, "Listen up, everyone. Fresh prey just came in." Murmurs rose from the sprawled figures. One bleary-eyed ruffian rubbed his temples and squinted at the intruder. "Oh, Walding, is that you? What's got you barging in? I'm barely awake from last night's party." Walding cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Quiet. This time, it's not your usual drunks. It's something extraordinary." He reached into his coat, produced a thick envelope, and slammed it down on the central table. The promise of a hefty reward set the restless crowd buzzing with sudden, hungry energy. The wanted poster read 92,000 Baileys, and everyone in the shabby wooden hut froze. The grainy photograph and bold lettering left no room for doubt. This was Ghost Hand Rhodes. These pirate hunters made their living beheading rookie pirates who dared to breach the Grand Line, then turning in the bodies for reward money. But 92 million Baileys? "Did I read that right?" one hunter mumbled, blinking in disbelief. Almost on cue, the others shook off their morning grogginess, eyes widening as they crowded around the poster. The highest bounties they'd ever claimed had hovered around 30 million. A 92 million target was a whole different beast, one they'd never even dreamt of chasing. "Walding," someone growled, slapping a meaty fist against the table. "We're done for. A pirate with a bounty that high. There's no way we can handle him." Walding's grin only widened. He leaned back in his chair, tossing his cap onto the table. "Calm down," he said. "Rhodes isn't some New World warlord. He's just a rookie fresh out of the East Blue, barely into the Grand Line. Believe it or not, we might actually stand a chance." Descending from above was the term for vessels that had sailed out from one of the Grand Line's islands and were now heading back into the Four Seas. Conversely, ascending from below referred to newcomers who just entered the Grand Line from the Four Seas. The veteran bounty hunters standing around exchanged incredulous looks. A newcomer from the Four Seas with a 92 million berry bounty? That's impossible, one scoffed. "We've been tracking pirates for years and have never heard of a rookie with a reward that high." Walding chuckled. "I saw their Jolly Roger on the dock earlier and decided to take a closer look. Sure enough, they're real, fresh off the West Blue. They call themselves the Ghost Hand Pirates, and their captain's name is Nithin." He shrugged. If a longtime Grand Line pirate carried a 92 million bounty, nobody in their right mind would dare cross him. But remember, a bounty isn't a pure measure of strength. It's just the world government's way of rating how dangerous they think you are. 50 million Baileys in the Four Seas doesn't hold a candle to a 30 million Bailey bounty on the Grand Line. The level of threat is entirely different, you see? Walding's tone brooked no argument. Still, a few in the crowd exchanged doubtful glances. One of them couldn't help but speak up. "But 92 million Bailey? That sounds wildly inflated. Even if he's from the West Sea, that's almost unthinkable." Walding merely smiled and slapped a fresh bounty sheet onto the table. "All right, then. Look at her." He tapped the poster. "She's also a member of the Ghost Hand Pirates, and her official bounty is 79 million Bailey. I dug into her history. Rumor has it she's O'Hara's devil spawn. The government clearly set such a high reward to mask something far more dangerous." A hush fell over the room. Every pair of eyes locked onto the new poster, and for a moment, no one dared to breathe. Nithin flipped through the ledger, eyes widening. 92 million plus 79 million. That's over 170 million Baileys. They've been hunting pirates all year, yet these targets probably don't even have that kind of cash lying around. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen up. Eileen's crew already has this bounty in their sights. Kerbero and Barth won't stand by either. If we hesitate, they'll swoop in and claim every last Bailey." Nithin slammed his fist on the table. "Remember Taros Island? There was a 60 million Bailey reward, and everyone balked. That pirate went on a killing spree across the South China Sea, civilians slaughtered, before someone finally took him down. They survived, but barely." At the mention of Eileen, Kerbero, and Barth, the hunters around the table snapped to attention. Eyes met in fierce agreement, and one by one, they pounded their fists against the wood. "Not this time," someone growled. We're not giving Eileen's girls the lead. Nethan allowed himself a crooked grin. Over 170 million Baileys on the line. If we nail this job, we'll be set for years. Let's move. With that, the group rose as one, resolve burning in their eyes. They were ready to chase down their next and most lucrative prey. Nethan glanced around the crowded tavern. At that very moment, several other pirate hunter crews from across town sprang to their feet in unison, pounding their fists on the tables, their eyes burning with avarice and anticipation. Like sharks drawn by the scent of fresh blood, they closed in on one another, their movements taut and predatory. Unseen by most, a storm was gathering in the streets, an invisible surge of tension that threatened to break at any second. Chapter 64. Quarrel. The war had all but erased this island's history. Robin skirted the outskirts of Pruton Town, surveying its ruined stone walls and shattered monuments with a sinking heart. This place was supposed to be one of the starting islands on the Great Route. Surely pirates once lurked here, but without some indestructible record like a stone stele, every scrap of its past had vanished. Having completed her circuit of the town, she turned back toward the main road. Not far along the path, Lafitte materialized, leaning against a crimson cane. He gave her a knowing smile. "Heading back so soon, Miss Robin? I noticed a few locals here weren't exactly thrilled to see us." Robin lifted her chin. "I've gathered everything I can. It's time to report back to the captain." As the fleet's intelligence officer, she'd been all too aware of the dozens of covert glances cast her way during her tour. Yet she'd held her ground. No point in making a move alone when it belonged in a full report to Rhodes. Lafitte's smile deepened, inscrutable beneath his dapper hat. He tipped it in a mock salute and let her pass. Nethan stood on the deck of the Ghost Shadow, watching his two officers load fresh water and provisions into the cavernous hold. Robin and Rhodes labored calmly. Robin with his usual impassive expression, Rhodes barking orders to the dockhands as they hauled barrel after barrel aboard. Lafitte hovered nearby, his ever-present red cane tapping anxiously against the wood. With the hold less than half full from their last stop at Bellows to Pruton, Nethan had insisted they take on as much supplies as possible. At this rate, the Ghost Shadow could sail for months without touching land. Rhodes even secured a crate of pasta from a renowned noodle shop ashore. "The broth there has secrets Robin could learn," he joked earlier, tucking a sample into his pack for later. As the final barrel thumped into place, Lafitte strode up the gangway. He swept his cane in a low arc and flashed Nethan a crooked grin. "Captain, word just came in. This island's crawling with pirate hunters, and we've already made their list." Nethan's jaw tightened. He glanced back at the neatly stacked barrels and crates, then toward the cluster of buildings lining the pier. "All right," he said, nodding. "Prepare to weigh anchor. Let them come." Nethan had already sensed someone watching him, but he didn't know whether it was a pirate or a Navy scout, and he chose to ignore it. Let them stare, he thought. No need to worry. Lafitte, noticing Nethan's nonchalance, twirled his cane with a crooked smile. "I just hope those poor bounty hunters don't decide to make a fuss," he said quietly. "If they do, they'll regret it." In Pruton Town, bounty hunters swarmed like vultures. A reward on Nethan's head was as high as that on the infamous Rhodes, and word of a fresh face newly arrived from the West Sea spread fast. To them, he was a plump fish waiting on the butcher's block, and they weren't about to let him slip through their fingers. Just as the last barrels of fresh water and crates of food were being stowed, a group of 10 bounty hunters appeared at the west end of the pier. Their leader was a hulking woman with a massive machete resting on her shoulder, her rough, scarred features so intimidating it was hard to meet her eyes. No sooner had they reached the dock than another 10 hunters emerged from the east side of the wharf, each one sizing up Nethan like a prize catch. Nethan tightened his grip on his sword's hilt. He was outnumbered, but he was ready. The afternoon sun beat down on the old dock, where crates and barrels were stacked in haphazard piles. Laborers scurried about with anxious eyes, unloading cargo for whatever shady business drew them here. At the pier's center stood a broad-shouldered man, a heavy machine gun slung across his chest. His leather cap was pulled low, and a stub of cigarette dangled from his lips. As two rival crews converged, the dockhands froze in terror, dropping their loads and seeking cover behind barrels. From one side, Walding, his burly frame bristling with menace, stepped forward. He leveled a glare at the scarred woman across from him, a cruel grin tugging at his lips. "Hey, Aileen, I called dibs on this one," Walding snarled, nodding toward a bound figure slumped against a crate. "Hand him over." Aileen straightened, her eyes cold and unyielding. The jagged scars along her cheek twitched as she replied, "When did you ever call dibs, Walding? Move aside, if you value your hide." Walding's grin widened. He rapped his knuckles against the gun's barrel. "You got lucky last time, bitch. Don't think we're afraid of you now. Try to stop us, if you dare." A sharp hush fell. Both sides raised their weapons, hands tightening on triggers. The wooden planks of the pier creaked under the tension, and the ghost shadow, moored just beyond the dock, seemed to shudder at the standoff. Before anyone could fire, two new figures appeared at the southern end of the pier. They were middle-aged men in identical weathered jackets, one tall and lean, the other shorter but broad-chested, so alike in features that they might have been twins. They paused at the edge of the crowd, surveying the deadly tableau before them with unreadable expressions. The charged silence stretched, every eye fixed on the newcomers. In that pregnant moment, the fate of the bound captive, and perhaps of everyone on that dock, hung in the balance. Nethan watched as more than a dozen armed men filed in behind Cerbero and Barth, their weapons glinting in the torchlight. The sudden arrival drew a sharp rebuke from Walden, who stepped forward with a steely look. "What's all this? Cerbero, Barth, you show up at the 11th hour and expect to just join us?" Cerbero, a towering figure with a crooked grin, shrugged. "You think you can take on the Ghost Hand Pirates alone? Their bounty's set at 170 million Bailey, and they're deadly in a fight. You'd end up breaking more than your teeth if you tried." Beside him, Barth had chuckled. "Exactly. A prize that big isn't easy pickings, and even if you do manage to bring them down, what about your losses? How many of you would survive to split the money?" For a moment, the tension in the cavern was almost palpable. Then, slowly, Eileen and Walden eased their grips on their swords. Nethan could see the calculation in their eyes. 170 million Bailey was substantial, but not worth a deadly brawl between allies. If they couldn't share the spoils peacefully, everyone would walk away empty-handed. Cerbero's grin widened as he surveyed the uneasy truce. "So," he said, voice low and confident, "why not work together? 3 ways, and no one's biting off more than they can chew." Walding snorted. "Fine, I'll team up with you, but under no circumstances am I working with that stinking girl. If she even tries to join us, we'll kill her first." Eileen's eyes went cold. "Walding, you really want to die, don't you?" Tension crackled as the two squared off, until a light, mocking voice drifted down from above. Everyone looked up to see Lafitte perched on the rail of the ghost's shadow, casually twirling a blood-red cane. "Mind taking your quarrel somewhere else?" he called, grinning. "Our captain's mood is fragile today. Hey, Walding, Eileen, you're already eyeing the Ghost Hand Pirates like they're your dinner. Not very subtle." A few pirate hunters sneered back. "And who are you supposed to be? No bounty on your head. Worthless." The air grew thick with hostility. Every pair of eyes locked on Lafitte and the strangers below, each side ready to strike at the slightest provocation. Some onlookers sneered at Lafitte, their lips curling into cruel smiles. "Don't worry," one of them taunted. "Your journey ends here. Soon you won't have anything left to fear." Chapter 65. "That's terrible news," the pirate hunter gasped, clutching his side. "But my journey's only just begun. I refuse to end it here. What do you say to that?" He managed a shaky grin. Lafitte only smiled back, his expression oddly calm. Before the hunter could react, Lafitte slipped into the shadows and disappeared. In the next heartbeat, he materialized behind the hunter, with a musket in hand. A stunned silence fell over the onlookers. No one had seen Lafitte's silent approach. It was as if he'd teleported. The hunter's eyes went wide with shock. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Lafitte's lips curled into a strange half-smile. "So, do you think your journey ends here?" The crew snapped out of their daze and trained their weapons on Lafitte, but he didn't hesitate. He fired. The musket's roar shattered the night as shards of blood spattered the deck. The pirate hunter's body convulsed once, twice, then collapsed with a heavy thud. "Kill him!" someone shouted. The deck erupted into chaos. Many pirate hunters stood seething with frustration. They leveled their guns at Lafitte and fired, but after only 2 or 3 shots, they stopped. There was nothing to shoot at. Lafitte had vanished like a phantom. "Sorry, Captain," one of them muttered, lowering his weapon. "Looks like they won't settle this here." In the next instant, Lafitte reappeared at Nethan's side, and drawing a hidden pistol with a wry grin. "My apologies, Captain," he said softly. Nethan inclined his head, unfazed. "No harm done." The hunters realized too late that Lafitte had slipped back aboard the Ghost Shadow. They swung their guns toward the 2 figures, Lafitte and Robin, standing on the deck. Nearby, Eileen and Walding, who only moments before had been at odds, now watched in tense silence, their faces solemn. No one could shake the shock of Lafitte's disappearing act, nor the even greater surprise that he carried no bounty. And though he stood unmarked by the law, his unwavering deference to Rhodes spoke volumes. Rhodes, the infamous pirate whose 92 million Bailey's price made him one of the most wanted men on the seas, cast an invisible but undeniable weight over everyone present. It wasn't going to be as simple as they'd hoped. Kerbero's light smile vanished, replaced by a grave, determined expression. He turned to Walden and Aileen. "Let's put our personal scores aside," he said. "This time we have to work together. If we don't, Pruiton will suffer heavy losses, and we'll lose control of the town." Pruiton was crawling with pirate hunters, all bankrolled by 3 powerful families that had already pushed out most foreign operatives. Aileen merely snorted in agreement, while Walden's solemn nod made his stance clear. None of them felt strong enough to tackle this on their own. "We pool our forces, we take down that pirate gang, then split the bounty," Kerbero continued. With 171 million Bailey reward on their heads, these pirates were dangerous, but the payoff was too tempting to pass up. Walden fixed his steely gaze on the trio from Rhodes. "Let's move," he growled. He hefted the heavy machine gun slung over his shoulder, squeezed the trigger, and a devastating hail of bullets tore toward the 3 pirates. The pirate hunters opened fire in unison. Rifles cracked and portable cannon boomed through the smoke, whoosh, whoosh, as they unleashed shell after shell at Robin, Lafayette, and Nethan. Robin and Lafayette instinctively fell back to flank positions. Lafayette yanked his musket to his shoulder, steadied his aim, and prepared to return fire. Robin crossed his arms, eyes narrowing, ready to channel his ability, but before either could act, Nethan's voice cut through the roar of gunfire. "Stand back. I've got this." He stepped forward into the hail of bullets without hesitation. Dozens of lead slugs slammed into his coat and shirt, burying themselves in the fabric, but none pierced him. Each bullet warped and twisted on contact, as though gripped by some invisible vice. Ding, ding, dong, dong. Nethan held out both hands. The trapped bullets rattled free from his clothes, but instead of clattering to the ground, they hovered in midair. With a subtle twist of his palms, the deformed projectiles drew together, fusing into a single, grotesque mass of iron. Pop! The impromptu grenade hung suspended before Nethan for a heartbeat, then collapsed into his clenched fist. He flicked his wrist, and the iron shard spun away harmlessly into the night. Walding and the other hunters froze, jaws slack. Devil fruit powers were nothing new on the Grand Line, but witnessing one in action, especially such a display of metal manipulation, never lost its shock. "It's a devil fruit user," one whispered. Their earlier confidence drained away, replaced by a fresh wave of fear. Nethan tossed aside the tangled mass of iron, bullets and cannonballs fused together, and his figure blurred. In a single motion, he vaulted from the ship's rail and landed lightly on the weathered dock below. "After him," Walding barked. Although no one in the pirate hunters' ranks had ever actually seen a devil fruit ability in action, they knew enough to stay wary. At his command, a dozen blades flashed free of their sheaths as the hunters surged forward. Steel met air, and immediately something impossible happened. Every sword that struck Nethan's body seemed to turn to liquid on contact. Blades bent and twisted as though made of molten metal, folding into sharp L shapes. A particularly bold hunter lunged home, only to have his blade coil around Nethan like a serpent, writhing and constricting with uncanny fluidity. Unfazed, Nethan simply stepped forward. The bent swords writhed at his feet, but his eyes never left the circle of hunters. He reached out a single hand, fingertips brushing the closest man's chest. In an instant, the hunter's torso writhed grotesquely, twisting until his upper body separated from his legs in a horrific, silent snap. A scream erupted, but the others barely registered it. Their swords slipped from slack fingers as shock rippled through the group. Walding's jaw dropped. Beside him, Kerbero's face went pale. Never before had they faced anything like this. "By all that's holy, what power is this?" Walding whispered. They had come prepared to hunt pirates, but they had never signed up for this. As pirate hunters, they prided themselves on knowing when and whom to pursue. Now, forced to recognize the true scope of their prey, they hesitated, hearts pounding and weapons wavering. Nethin stepped forward into the flickering lantern light, an almost casual smile playing across his lips. The hunters stiffened, realizing that the chase had only just begun, and that they might very well be outmatched. "If you can't tell them apart, you never will." Nithin's voice was flat as he stepped forward. Wherever he went, wherever his fingertips hovered, the pirate hunters' bodies split apart. In the past, his power had shattered muscle and bone, now it rent flesh at the cellular level. There was no sickening crack of snapping bones, nor did blood pool from the freshly severed limbs. It was as if their bodies were sliced clean by an unseen scalpel. Two hunters collapsed, each cut in half with surgical precision, yet not a drop of blood stained the deck. A low, icy tension filled the air. Aeline's eyes blazed with fury as she watched Nethin advance through the carnage. Without a word, she hefted her machete in both hands and swung with all her strength, driving the blade down in a lethal arc that vibrated the humid air. Nethin's gaze sharpened. Calmly, he pulled back his hand and flicked his fingers. The machete's edge stalled mid-swing, struck by an invisible force. There was only a muted clang, no ringing bell, no triumphant crash, just the quiet undoing of Aeline's desperate strike. She froze, machete trembling in her grasp, while Nethin took another step forward, unflinching. Nethin stood over the shattered remains of Eileen's huge machete. The blade had liquefied at his touch, and with a single fluid motion of his fingers it split neatly in two. A flicker of disgust crossed his face. He barely dared look at the warped metal. He shifted his weight and stamped the ground. Instantly, a surge of sand roared up around Eileen, twisting into a vice that crushed the pirate hunter in a dull final thud. Even now, pain throbbed behind Nethin's eyes. They hadn't healed. He closed them briefly, relying on sound to confirm the outcome. 7 or 8 pirate hunters, including Walding, stood frozen in the aftermath. They watched Eileen's silent defeat, mouths agape, as terror crept into their eyes. Could this unassuming youngster really be a rookie who'd only just stepped onto the great route? One by one, they stumbled back. 1 step, 2, then turned and fled in panic. The sight of them running made Nethin's vision sting. "Don't run," he murmured, his voice quiet but steely. When he opened his eyes again, they shone with a calm indifference that sent another shiver through the empty air. Nethin lifted his hand, and the sands beneath his feet erupted in a roiling tide, sweeping up the 7 or 8 pirate hunters who had tried to flee. He clenched his fist, and from the shifting dunes came a soft, wet crunch, like tomatoes being crushed underfoot. Then, as abruptly as it began, the commotion died away into silence. January, the 12th year of the Great Pirate Era. The newly christened Ghost Hand Pirates had at last breached the Grand Line. Their very first act was stamped in blood on Pluton Town, the once proud stronghold of the Pirate Hunter Guild. In that moment, legends whispered of far-off seas were about to be rewritten by Nethin and his crew. Chapter 66. Naval Engagements. The islands at the threshold of the Grand Line have always been a magnet for marine hunter squadrons. Every pirate must run this gauntlet before venturing deeper into those fabled waters. Pruton was no exception. 3 powerful marine contingents once held the town under a brutal thumb, but after Nethin and his crew crushed them one by one, no one in Pruton dared lift a finger against the pirate ship again. For 3 untroubled days, they stayed in port, using the time to recharge the logpose's magnetic memory to its limit. Once the device was fully recorded, they weighed anchor and set sail for the next island on their route. Unbeknownst to Nethin, Navy headquarters had already intercepted the reports of his arrival in Pruton and quickly deduced his likely course. Unlike the labyrinth of islands in the West Blue, the Grand Line's opening stretch is navigated solely with the log pose and the eternal pose, and the log pose must remain on each island for several days to lock in its magnetic signature. In other words, any ship carrying one follows a painfully predictable schedule. Knowing this, the Navy dispatched warships to the next island ahead of Nethin's crew, preparing an ambush. As the pirate ship crested the horizon toward the unfamiliar shore, its captain remained blissfully unaware that the true trial at the gateway to the Grand Line was only just beginning. Nethin watched the waves churn beneath Ghost Hand's swift schooner, eyes narrowed as the spyglass slipped from his hand. He knew what was coming. The Navy had long ago established fixed navigational markers at every island in the first half of the Grand Route. With those beacons in place, once the Admiralty decided to strike, their fleets could sail straight to any target, no time wasted charting new courses. At the Messenger G8 naval base, Commodore Doberman slammed his fist onto the command table. Reports had just come in. The Ghost Hand pirates were operating squarely within the Grand Route's patrol zone. "This time," Doberman growled, "I won't give them a single chance to slip away. No more rumors, no more half measures." Under his orders, the entire base shifted into high alert. Officers barked commands. Sailors scrambled to their posts. On the docks, row upon row of warships readied their sails, stocked with ammunition and steeled for combat. The mood was grim. This wasn't a routine patrol or a show of force. When the Navy singles out a pirate crew for extermination, no quarter is given, and escape is nearly impossible. Meanwhile, aboard Ghost Hand's vessel, Nethin sensed the sudden tension in the salt-tinged air. Somewhere out there, a massive naval armada was already setting course for their position. He clenched his fists, determination flaring in his chest. They might have the advantage of surprise every other time, but never again. Not when the full might of the G8 fleet was coming for them. In the world's oceans, the deadliest power isn't found in the four emperors of the New World or the mighty king of the seven seas. It's embodied by the world government's Navy. This is the Navy's golden age. Zephyr's arm remains whole. Garp still patrols the Grand Line. The veteran heavyweights of old are in their prime, and three fearsome admirals, Akainu, Aokiji, and Kizaru, command its fleets. To challenge an emperor's crew on open water is virtually suicide. When an emperor and the Navy collide head-on, victory for the pirates is all but unthinkable. 5 days after departing Pruton Island, Nethin found himself alone in the Ghost Shadow's training hall. Before him stood a solid steel block, glinting cold and unyielding. He wrapped his hands in bandages, focused his will, and began. Fist after fist struck the metal with thunderous impact, each blow sending shockwaves through the floor and rattling the walls. This was no mere workout. It was a trial of his armament hockey, a crucible in which he hammered out every weakness. At his current level, a simple sandbag would have exploded under his power. Only hardened steel could bear the weight of his wrath. Yet Nethin drove on, determined to push beyond every limit the Navy's might hurl at him. Nethin kept swinging his fists, forcing his armament hockey to condense around his forearms. After several failed attempts, each time the hockey collapsing back into a shimmering haze, something finally clicked. In an instant, his fist turned a deep, matte black. Boom! The roar of the strike rattled the entire training room as Nethin's hardened fist met the thick steel slab. A clear dent marred the metal, proof that his hockey had held together, if only briefly. Only once or twice out of 10 did he manage a hit this solid. He stared at his hand. Before he could launch another punch, the jet-black hardening faltered and unraveled, scattering into unstable wisps of armament hockey once more. Ever since he'd shifted his training regimen to emphasize both raw physical strength and his armament hockey, Nethin had made steady progress. When he first set foot on Pruton Island, he could only summon this black hardening at best a few times, and almost never long enough to keep it. Now, although he still struggled to sustain it, the moments when his hockey stayed solid were growing more frequent, and that meant he was closer than ever to mastering true color hardening. Nethin had spent the last 5 days pushing himself deeper into armament hockey's hardening technique. Bit by bit, he'd unlocked its true essence. His conqueror's hockey was now strong enough to coat his fists, and he could channel the hardening at will. The raw output of his Haoshoku, Conqueror's Haki, had reached the minimum threshold for a flawless hardening, but he knew that a little more power would make the process even smoother. He stared at the solid steel block before him, brows furrowed in thought. In contrast to his relentless work on armament Haki, he devoted far less time to observation Haki over these days. Clearly, mastering observation Haki demanded a higher degree of finesse and patience. Yet because both observation and Conqueror's Haki require a perfectly calm mind, and Nethan could keep his emotions in check better than most, those two were the areas where he already excelled. Still, he refused to neglect his devil fruit gift. The distortion fruit remained his greatest trump card. Since the fierce clash on Proton Island, he'd been subtly pushing his distortion powers to new limits, exploring them in ever more creative ways. From glimpsing sudden spatial ripples to twisting the air around his knuckles, it was plain to see he now commanded his distortion ability with complete confidence. Taking a steadying breath, Nethan closed his eyes and focused. The polished steel square absorbed the afternoon light as he summoned a surge of Haki. A purple sheen spread rapidly over his right fist, cracks of energy shimmering along its surface. The ground beneath his feet trembled as he pressed his hardened knuckles against the metal. With a single thunderous strike, the steel block shattered into gleaming fragments. Nethan opened his eyes, a spark of satisfaction dancing across his features. Training had paid off, and yet he knew this was only the beginning. Ahead lay stronger opponents and fiercer challenges, but armed with a perfected hardening technique, sharpened observation, and Conqueror's Haki, and a fully mastered distortion fruit, he felt more ready than ever. Nethan wiped the sweat from his brow with a towel and stepped out of the training room onto the deck. He paused, reaching for a drink, when he noticed Robin seated at a tea table, a steaming cup of lemon tea before her. Without a word, he picked up the cup and took a measured sip. Robin closed the book she'd been reading and offered him a warm, slightly nervous smile. "Captain, you could at least pretend to be more relaxed," she teased. "But no matter, thank you. So where are we now? How long until the next island?" Setting the cup back down, Nethan gazed out at the endless blue. In moments, Lafitte emerged from the shadows by the rail. "At our current speed," Lafitte reported, "Ted, the ghost shadow will carry us from Proton Island to Elias Island in about 10 days. Nethan nodded, studying the sunlight dancing on the waves. Robin watched him for a heartbeat, then set her book aside. "Captain," she said quietly, "if nothing unexpected happens, we might run into the Navy as soon as we reach Elias." Nethan turned to her, brow furrowed. "The Navy?" he repeated. "Explain." Robin's expression grew serious. "They patrol the strait tight. If they spot us, they'll try to intercept." Nethan leaned forward, the weight of their journey settling on his shoulders. "Then we'll have to be ready." He picked up his tea again, its steam curling between them like a silent promise. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Robin's voice was firm. "During my stay in Proton, I gathered intelligence on a few islands nearby, and discovered that the G8 naval detachment lies uncomfortably close to our planned course. An average pirate crew just venturing onto the Great Route rarely draws the full might of a Navy branch, but the Ghost Hand pirates are different. They can't ignore us. This Great Route detachment isn't anything like the West Sea outposts. They've got at least 2 lieutenant commanders, each with a heavy warship bristling with long-range cannons. Their firepower far outstrips our lighter guns. If they bring those broadsides to bear, it would only be a matter of time before the Ghost Shadow is torn apart." Chapter 67, Arrival at Elias. The Silver Shell glided into the G8 sector of Elias Island just before dawn. As the anchor thudded against the seabed, Nathan's amber eyes narrowed. "We're sailing in with nothing but a rough waypoint," he said, voice low. "We can't predict every trap or patrol around the next island. That's just the nature of this business. If they want to challenge us, let them come." Robin leaned back in her captain's chair, the edge of her lips curling into a faint smile. "You never lack confidence, Captain," she observed, though her tone betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Rhodes' recent exploits in the West Blue had already stirred the ire of the higher naval command and earned her a hefty bounty from the world government. Word of their deeds had spread like wildfire even before they'd reached the Grand Line, drawing countless pairs of watchful eyes. Robin's smile faded. "They've marked us as public enemies," she said, glancing at the portside horizon. "Once our position is known, the Navy won't hesitate. They'll throw every ship they have at us, surround us, and press their advantage. They see us as a bigger threat than any other pirate crew." Nethan ran a hand through his unruly hair. "We've only picked up a handful of new crew along the way," he reminded her. "We're still small compared to the established fleets." "A flotilla of marine vessels won't care about our head count," Robin countered. "To them, we're a dangerous anomaly, a pirate band that's growing too fast and leaving a trail of havoc in its wake. Once we cross into the Grand Line proper, their encirclement won't just be a blockade. It'll be a noose, tightened until we break." Silence fell between them as the sun's first rays breached the horizon. On the shore, the lights of Elias flickered like distant stars, unaware of the storm about to come. The crew moved on deck, securing lines and prepping for whatever lay ahead. Nethan surveyed the island's rugged silhouette, steeling himself for the trials to come. "Let them make the first move," he said at last. "We'll be ready." Nethan stood on the Ghost's deck, staring out at the restless sea. "Only by breaking this siege and rising above it can we secure our place on the Great Route," he told himself. "Then we won't live in constant fear of being overturned." He drew in a steadying breath. "The danger is coming, and nothing can stop it. There's no point in fear. I won't be afraid." He spoke the words calmly, as if naming a fact rather than confessing a hope. Since the showdown was inevitable, he had only one choice: meet it head-on. And this wasn't a moment of despair. Far from it. This would be when the Navy headquarters learned to tremble at the name of the Ghost. "I never wanted to become a pirate," Nethan murmured to the wind. "You left me no choice, but now that we're here, are you ready?" He watched the waves crest and break, then flicked his eyes away and slipped below deck. In the ship's training room, he resumed his grueling drills, punch after punch, kick after kick, sharpening himself for what lay ahead. 5 days later, the Ghost dropped anchor off Elias Island, the second port of call on their stretch of the Great Route. Elias was no mere speck of land. It was the heart of an entire realm, the Kingdom of Elias. And history had shown that wherever people lived under oppression, they discovered untapped reserves of strength. Here, Nethan would test his own. After 5 days of relentless training for the coming decisive battle, Nethan's body and presence had grown stronger and more commanding than ever. His armament hockey, once erratic, had begun to stabilize, and failures in hardening, it had all but vanished so long as he remained calm and focused. He stood on the brink of fully mastering its advanced form. Only a real fight remained to push him past that final boundary. In the world of One Piece, nothing stimulated one's latent potential like combat. Ahead lay Elias Island, a vast territory whose hidden magnetic reserves would take at least a week to fully harness. Lafitte glanced at the chronometer on his wrist. The timing was perfect. Nethan took his place at the bow, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the island's rugged silhouette. "We won't approach the main port," he ordered. "It's too exposed. Navy patrols are bound to be there. Instead, steer us around to the west side and drop anchor beneath those cliffs." The crew sprang into action. By mooring out of sight, they'd avoid detection and buy themselves the time they needed before the battle began. Nethan stared up at the sheer 30-meter cliff face above them. The Ghost's shadow might be tougher than any warship, but a focused barrage of cannon fire could still leave her riddled with holes. They needed higher ground, and fast. "Can we make it up there?" Nethan asked, turning to Lafitte and Robin. Lafitte glanced skyward, tapping his wooden staff against the deck. "No problem. It's steep, but I can do it." Robin hesitated. I'm not so sure." Before she could finish, Lafitte flicked his staff once more. 2 graceful white wings unfurled from his shoulder blades, beating the air with surprising strength. Nethan nodded to himself. He'd read about Lafitte's devil fruit ability, so the sight wasn't a shock. Robin took a steadying breath. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, and delicate petals began to swirl around her. In an instant, the blossoms wove themselves into a second pair of wings on her back. With a powerful flap, Robin lifted off the deck and shot upward. In moments, both Lafitte and Robin had vanished over the cliff's rim. Nethan clenched his fists. No more waiting. He'd follow them up and gain the altitude they so desperately needed. Nethin watched Robin struggle to lift off. Robin's frame was perfectly slim, his narrow waist and long legs hardly a handicap. The real problem lay in his devil fruit power. It simply wasn't strong enough yet to sustain true flight. Nethin shook his head and called up to him. Your fruit ability's underpowered. You'll need to develop it more before you can fly properly. With a final burst of effort, Robin climbed to about 25 meters above sea level. Then his wing-like limbs, each one a twisting, petal-shaped arm, began to falter. They collapsed inward and scattered like soft confetti on the breeze. Instead of plummeting, Robin slammed into the cliff's edge, braced himself, and did something extraordinary. He sprouted new arms along the rock face, forming them into a makeshift staircase. Inch by inch, he climbed back up to safety. Nethin frowned. Something about that display felt off, but he let his concerns lie and withdrew the half-formed arms he'd unconsciously raised. Nearby, Lafitte had already landed beside Robin, securing their position on the island. On the ship, Captain Rhodes lowered his spyglass and addressed his crew. "Keep a close watch on them," he ordered, tapping the phone bug hidden in his jacket. "If anything happens down there, use this to alert me immediately. The Navy's communications network is too valuable to risk." His gaze drifted back toward the island, unblinking and alert. Since Lafitte joined their ranks, he'd been busy outfitting his own vessel, and now the armada numbered 3 ships in all, the flagship under Captain Nethin's direct command, plus 1 each for Lafitte and Robin. The crew bristled with excitement. "Aye, Captain," they chorused, their loyalty plain to see. Once they were underway, Nethin turned to Lafitte. "Use your hypnotic talent on the crew. I want their devotion absolute." With a subtle gesture, Lafitte wove his influence through every sailor's mind, sealing their unshakable loyalty. Satisfied, Nethin vaulted into the air, slipping across the deck in a flawless moonstep, and, in a heartbeat, emerged atop the cliff overlooking the island. Lafitte and Robin were already there. Nethin pointed to the forested slopes below. "From here we split up. Lafitte, you take the western trail. Robin, you head east. Stay in constant contact. Report anything unusual." Lafitte's spectral wings had long since vanished. He tucked his cane behind his back, offered a brief bow, then melted into the jungle. Robin was gone just as quickly, vanishing along a separate path toward the heart of the Elias Kingdom. Meanwhile, 4 days out to sea, a formidable fleet scythed through the waves. 2 massive warships accompanied by 3 agile cruisers, all racing toward Elias Island at full speed. Chapter 68, Advanced Record Pointers. The kingdom of Elias was famed the world over for its luxury services, and above all, its hot springs. Scattered across the countryside, these baths drew celebrities and dignitaries eager for an indulgent escape. In one exclusive spa house, a private pool 4 to 5 meters across offered guests complete seclusion. The room's decor was tasteful and refined, with soft lighting and marble accents that spoke of understated elegance. Nethin lay on the pool's edge, eyes closed, letting the warm water buoy him. Not far away, beyond a gently frosted partition, stretched a spacious communal bath, but he preferred solitude. He wouldn't have minded if Robin chose to join him, yet the younger man rarely showed up uninvited. Since embracing life as a pirate, uninterrupted downtime had become a rare luxury. In his previous incarnation as a pirate hunter roaming the western seas, vanquishing bands of marauders after marauders, he had treated himself to regular sojourns here. Now, most of his days passed aboard his ship, at the mercy of wind and wave. He stretched one arm out toward the wooden bench where he'd placed his clothes and small satchel within easy reach. Steam curled around him like a soft veil, and for a moment all was still. Then, from somewhere near his neatly stacked garments, came a muffled thump, followed by labored breathing. Nethin's eyes snapped open. Someone, or something, was hiding in the shadows of the spa's arrangements. And it wasn't alone. Nethin opened his eyes and climbed out of the water. He grabbed a towel, dried himself off, and pulled on his clothes. As he buttoned his shirt, he slipped a tiny transmitter, what sailors often called a bug, from his pocket and clamped it to his collar. A moment later, Lafitte's voice buzzed softly in his ear. "Captain, I found something that could be of great use." Nethin raised an eyebrow as he finished dressing. "Oh, and what might that be?" From a shadowed alcove nearby, Lafitte's tone dropped to a whisper. It's a special recording dial, one of the rare three-pointer models. Rumor has it this version comes from the latter half of the Grand Line. Instead of just one, it has 3 compass needles, so it can lock onto 3 islands at once. At the mention of a three-pointer dial, Nethan's gaze sharpened. He was well acquainted with ordinary recording dials, but he hadn't expected to encounter an advanced model so far east of the Grand Line. Could it really function in these waters? Then again, the three-pointer was merely an upgraded design of the usual dial, and those worked in the New World, so there was every reason to believe it might still operate here. "Where are you now?" Nethan asked, voice steady with anticipation. Nethan paused for a moment, brow furrowed, then tapped the comlink beside him. "Lafitte," he said quietly. "If the advanced recording pointer from the 3 Arrows outfit works in the first half of the voyage, it means I'm no longer confined to a single route. Even if the Navy dispatches its admiral to track me down, they'd have to pinpoint my exact position before they could interfere. What's the status?" Across the line, Lafitte's voice, crackling through the hidden bug in Nethan's cabin, answered vividly. "Word is, those record pointers have surfaced on the black market. There's a scrap going on at Beth Street right now. At least 3 factions are clawing for them. Rhodes isn't the only one chasing this gear. If they really function in the first half of a voyage, any pirate captain would kill for one. They'd be the perfect navigation upgrade." "Keep your eyes open," Nethan said firmly. "Hold your position until I get there." He clipped the final protective cuff onto his sleeve, pushed the cabin door wide, and strode into the lounge where Robin was idly reading yesterday's newspaper. "Robin," he called, voice low but urgent. "Find Lafitte. Tell him to send me every scrap of intel on these pointers." She lowered the paper, blinked in surprise. She'd barely settled in after his last surprise, and then snapped to her feet. "Right away, Captain." With a swift nod, she hurried after him as he disappeared down the corridor. A moment later, Nethan burst out onto Bass Street, eyes scanning the dim alleyways. Somewhere in the chaos, the fate of his entire voyage was up for grabs, and he intended to be the one holding the advantage. The screams blended with the crack of gunfire, driving civilians to scatter in panic. Among the fleeing crowd were portly men and scantily clad women wrapped only in bath towels. None paused to retrieve their belongings. The narrow street had become a chaotic battlefield where 3 pirate crews and a local gang clashed fiercely. "Captain, you made it just in time," Rhodes said at the mouth of a shadowed alley. Robin was at his side, and from the deeper darkness, Lafitte emerged, lifting his cane and pointing down the block. "See that pirate crew holding the signal projector? They tried to break out twice but failed. Now they're falling back toward that 3-story building." Rhodes nodded once, his gaze locked on the distant structure. Then, without hesitation, he stepped out of the alley and hurried forward. Gunpowder smoke hung thick in the air, punctuated by shouts and sporadic shots. Combatants from every faction dived behind overturned carts and stray crates, firing at one another from cover. Only a handful dared to engage in close-quarters skirmishes, the rest choosing to pick off targets from a distance. Rhodes pushed onward, each step bringing him closer to the besieged pirates and the heart of the fray. Nethan strode out onto the street with effortless confidence, immediately drawing curious and hostile glances. From a sandbag bunker ahead, the pirate captain, a grim-faced man clutching a blaster rifle, barked, "That's not one of ours. Take him down!" At his command, 4 nearby pirates opened fire. Bullets tore the air in a deafening fusillade, churning up dust and sparks, but Nethan barely flinched. He tilted his head ever so slightly, shrugged his shoulders, and continued walking as though the hail of lead were nothing more than a summer shower. Not a single round found its mark. One pirate staggered back, eyes wide. He dodged every shot! The captain's lips curved into a cold smile. "No," he said, voice low. "He anticipated them. This man isn't ordinary. Stay sharp." A reflex that sharp, that flair for evasion, marked Nethan as more than just another wanted thug. With a 50 million Bailey bounty on his head and a reputation among the galaxy's heavy hitters, he was a threat they couldn't take lightly. Yet Nethan had no interest in engaging these cutthroats. Unfazed, he passed by the stunned crew and faded into the chaos of the city beyond. Nethin's mission was simple. Seize the record pointer before the pirates holed up in that 3-story building could scale the walls and destroy it. If they got to it first, all his efforts would be wasted. He pressed forward, narrowly avoiding a burst of gunfire. From the upper windows, pirate rifles spat rounds at him, but Nethin moved with uncanny finesse. Each bullet whizzed past harmlessly. Frustrated shouts rose above him. "Why can't we hit him?" someone barked. The men inside exchanged uneasy glances. This intruder showed neither fear nor hesitation. At last, Nethin reached the ground floor entrance. With a single push, the heavy double doors swung open. He stepped inside, palms brushing the door jambs. In an instant, the bullets aimed at his face twisted sideways, careening back toward their owners. 2 pirates collapsed in crimson arcs. Before the others could react, Nethin darted forward like lightning. His boot crashed into the final thug in the lobby, sending him crashing to the floor. Nethin planted his foot firmly on the man's chest and leveled him with a steady gaze. "Where is it?" he demanded, voice measured and cold. The pirate coughed up blood, eyes wild. "It's with the captain." The pirate watched in horror as his 2 comrades fell without a sound, cut down by Nethin's cold efficiency. Trembling, he lifted his head to meet Nethin's lifeless stare, eyes that treated human life as nothing more than dust. "Where's your captain?" he managed. "Upstairs," Nethin answered, voice flat. "3rd floor." Without another word, he drew back his leg, stepped over the pirate's prone form, and strode toward the stairwell. The pirate scrambled to his feet, terror giving way to grim determination. He snatched up a musket from the deck and fired with a thunderous boom. But before he could even raise the weapon again, the entire first deck convulsed as though some unseen force had torn it apart. Splinters and debris burst upward in a violent spray. Nethin never faltered. He didn't look back or slow his pace. He simply climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, each footstep echoing ominously through the shuddering ship. Chapter 69. Nethin crept onto the 2nd floor, every nerve on edge. Before him, 5 pirates lay in wait. 3 held muskets trained on the staircase, and a 4th manned a makeshift field gun. The moment Nethin's foot crossed the top step, they opened fire. Boom, boom, boom! A hail of musket balls and a fist-sized shell hurtled toward him. To their shock, the instant the projectiles reached Nethin, they froze in midair, motionless as if grasped by an invisible hand. For a heartbeat, the pirates stood dumbfounded. Then one snarled, "He's one of them!" and charged, sword raised. Nethin's wrist flicked, leaving a faint after-image in the air. With a single fluid motion, he brushed his palm across the suspended bullets and shell. In an instant, they snapped back toward their senders in a deadly reverse volley. Before the charging pirate could strike, more than a dozen musket balls tore through his chest, and the shell's blast ripped the sword from his grasp. He coughed up blood, cried out, and slammed against the far wall. The 4 survivors staggered backward, eyes wide with terror. Nethin stood unmoved amid the echoing silence, proof that none of them could hope to stand against his power. Nethin didn't wait for the 4 pirates to decide how to stop him. He strode straight for the staircase, leading to the 3rd deck. The moment his boot hit the first step, the ceiling of the lower level buckled and twisted inward, crushing everything toward the center with a deafening crunch. In an instant, the 4 pirates who dared to block his way were swallowed whole. Then a sickening pop echoed as blood spattered the walls and ceiling of the 2nd floor. Unfazed, Nethin pressed on up the stairs. By the time he reached the 3rd deck, pandemonium reigned. Gunfire and the roar of shelling from the port side already had most of the pirates on edge, and now they heard that terrible distortion from below. At the head of the mob stood a burly pirate captain with a bristling brown beard and a tricorn hat cocked on his head. He snatched up the heavy axe hanging at his side, his eyes flashing with rage as he shouted, "Hold fast, men!" Nethin stepped onto the landing, just as the captain swung his axe with all his might. The blade whistled through the air, stirring up a fierce gust that seemed strong enough to tear him in 2. Yet Nethin braced himself for the coming strike, ready for whatever came next. Nethin stood his ground as the pirate's massive axe came crashing down. Anyone else would have flinched at the sight of that blade, but not him. He simply lifted his bare palm and caught the axe by its landing edge. "Die!" roared the brown-bearded pirate, eyes blazing with fury. He leaned into the swing, every muscle taut, determined to cleave Nethan in two. The force behind that strike could rip iron plating apart or split a stone wall as easily as paper. Yet the instant the axe's blade met Nethan's palm, something inexplicable happened. The rushing wind seemed to lock in place, trapped between the weapon and his hand by an unseen power. The axe ground to a halt in midair, stuck fast against Nethan's flesh, its momentum utterly spent. The pirate stared, jaw slack, pupils shrinking with disbelief and dread. He had unleashed the full force of his arm, certain this blow would shatter any defense, but here it was, impotent against bare skin. The impossible had just happened. Without waiting for any reaction, Nethan made a subtle flick of his hand. The pirate captain's axe howled as it twisted in midair. Steel groaned, cracked, and collapsed into a heap of useless scrap. "Damn!" Nethan spat, tossing the mangled metal aside. Underneath him, the pirate captain's eyes burned with panic. Before anyone could think to stop him, Nethan lunged forward, his movements a blur, and plucked the record pointer straight from the captain's wrist. "Son of a!" the captain roared, though his voice rang hollow against the sight of his slaughtered crew. Most of his men lay wounded or dead. Only a handful dared stand after Nethan's assault. "If you've taken it," the captain snarled, "you're not going anywhere. None of us are leaving this island alive without it." Nethan didn't dignify the threat with an answer. He slipped the pointer, its 3 slender arrows glinting, into his pocket, turned calmly, and fixed the captain and his remaining pirates with an icy stare. Then he stepped away, leaving them to stare after him. Nethan's power of distortion burst from his feet in a blinding wave, rippling outward until it enveloped the entire 3-story building. In an instant, the energy cascaded from the rooftop down to the ground floor. Then, without a word, Nethan lifted his arm and clenched his fist in midair. With a deafening roar, walls, ceilings, and support beams began to twist into grotesque spirals. It was as if some invisible giant had seized the structure at its top and bottom and was wringing it like a wet towel. Stone and timber splintered in every direction as the building imploded inward, collapsing into a single twisted helix of debris. From their vantage point just outside, members of the 3 rival factions, and even the hardened pirates with bounties of 40 to 50 million, gaped in horror. No one could tear their eyes away from the impossible sight of a solid 3-story edifice squeezed down to a spiral of rubble. Fear and disbelief rippled through the crowd. They had never seen power like this. When the old warehouse finished twisting in on itself like a crumpled sheet of metal, it froze for a heartbeat, and then exploded outward in a thunderous blast. Walls shattered into splinters, concrete rained down, and the roof collapsed in a single, devastating instant. Pirates from both rival crews and members of the local gang, dozens of hardened fighters, were buried beneath the wreckage. The reinforced bunker that had once stood as their stronghold was reduced to jagged rubble in the blink of an eye. Then he appeared. Emerging from the center of the devastation, Nethan stepped lightly over shattered floor slabs and fallen steel beams as if he'd walked out of a completely intact building. Not a thread of cloth was torn, not a drop of blood stained his skin. His damp hair clung to his forehead, and his autumn cloak fluttered around him, miraculously unscathed. Calm eyes surveyed the carnage, unreadable but utterly commanding. Around him, stunned pirates and gang members blinked at the wreckage. They exchanged fearful, awed glances. The man responsible for shredding the entire stronghold into rubble stood before them, alive and unharmed. In that silence, it became clear to everyone present that their captain had succeeded beyond all expectations. From a nearby rooftop, Lafayette and Robin watched as stones rained down around them. When the debris cleared, Nethan stood alone in the center of the street, unscathed and radiating calm confidence. Lafayette let out a low whistle, a pleased grin spreading across his face. Below, the gang members and the 2 pirate henchmen froze in their tracks. The devastation they'd just witnessed left them paralyzed by indecision. Should they charge or fall back? Neither option felt safe. Nethan didn't wait for them to make up their minds. With a steady breath, he stepped forward, extending both arms toward the cracked pavement. In an instant, a roaring distortion field erupted from his body and ripped into the ground. The street surface buckled, then surged upward like a violent wave, rippling outward in jagged folds. The tremors shattered concrete, sent street lamps swaying, and rattled every window in the block. Hard rock ordinarily resists even the strongest bending powers, yet Nethin's mastery of distortion overwhelmed it across a radius of tens of meters. Dust and debris shot skyward as the shockwave tore through the assembled thugs. "By all that's," Lafayette murmured, eyes wide. "What kind of power is that?" Almost before the echoes died away, the two pirates and the gang members were hurled off their feet, battered and disoriented. Nethin remained standing amid the upheaval, ready, unshaken, and in complete control of the havoc he'd wrought. The survivors froze in terror, then scattered into the distance, too frightened even to look back. The onlookers were equally stunned. Within a 20-meter radius, the street seemed to rise and fall like a stormy sea, stones hurling through the air in showers of debris. The chaos was enough to unnerve anyone, commoner or noble alike, and they all fled for their lives. Only when the last of the flying stones clattered back to the pavement did an eerie calm settle over the scene. Lafitte exhaled, his heart pounding, and let his gaze clear. Following Captain Rhodes had been the right choice, he thought, relief washing over him at the thought of having made it through such devastation. Chapter 70. The Navy arrives on Bass Street. Atop a modest 4-story hotel, an imposing figure stood before a towering floor-to-ceiling window. He looked almost avian, long-beaked, dressed in a dark suit and top hat. This was Morgans, one of the underworld's emperors, president of the World Economy News Agency and rumored ally of the 4 emperors' Big Mom pirates. He controlled a network of papers and news outlets around the globe, even maintaining a discreet partnership with the world government itself. Today, Morgans had his eyes fixed on the distant battlefield in the West Blue. He had been following the exploits of the upstart pirate Rhodes, nicknamed Ghost Hand, ever since Rhodes's unexpected rise. The agency had even reserved a special page in the paper for the newcomer. Now, standing here above the city's rooftops, Morgans peered sharply through the glass, as if his avian gaze could cut through the distance and size up Rhodes, now renamed Nethin, in the very heart of the fray. Such power on the West Blue was no small matter, and Morgans watched with keen interest to see how this fledgling would fare under the watchful eyes of the Navy. General Morgan watched the scene for a few seconds. He lifted a porcelain teacup to his lips, took a delicate sip of tea, then turned with a knowing smile toward the distant border of the Elias Kingdom. "If he survives this crisis," Morgan murmured, "he'll burn brighter than any supernova in the first half of this great voyage." In the direction of his gaze, a formidable armada thundered down the main thoroughfare. The G8 Grand Fleet of the Royal Navy had at last reached Elias, specifically Bass Street. Meanwhile, Nethin strode through the chaos below. After cutting down a handful of pirates and scattering dozens of gang members, he chose not to chase the panicked stragglers. Instead, he climbed toward the rendezvous point where Robin and Lafitte were waiting. High atop a tiled rooftop, Robin remained crouched in the shadows while Lafitte stood scanning the street below. Nethin approached swiftly, reached into his coat, and produced a slim recording pointer. With a precise flick of his wrist, he sent it spinning through the air toward Lafitte. "Let's see if it still works," he called up. Lafitte caught the device effortlessly, held it level before his eyes, and studied its gleaming surface. After a thoughtful pause, he spoke in a low, steady voice. "We can't judge by appearance alone. Only once its magnetic storage is full can we draw any real conclusions." Nethin studied the two compasses side by side. The single arrow instrument pointed in a direction that matched one of the 3 bearings on the advanced 3-arrow model, proof enough that the new device worked. It would let them lock onto each of the 3 islands independently. He nodded to himself. Until he'd tested the advanced compass at sea, he wasn't about to discard the old one. Losing his way on open water would be disastrous. Just as Lafitte slipped the new pointer onto his other wrist, Robin, who'd been stationed near the building, came sprinting over, his face pale with urgency. "Captain! The Navy's here!" Nethin and Lafitte turned toward the sound. 3 blocks away, a battalion of naval troops flooded into the street. Their presence had already quelled the chaos, but their mission was unmistakable. They were hunting the Ghost Hand pirates. Nethin's heart hammered as the enemy force thundered down Beth Street. Dozens of naval warships, Marines poured onto the cobblestones, rapidly encircling the block. Standing amid the chaos, Captain Rhodes watched them approach with an unsettling calm. "Captain?" Lafitte's voice cut through the din. He glanced at Rhodes, eyes pleading for orders. Fight or fall back. Nithin surveyed the tightening ring of blue and gold uniforms. A flicker of disdain crossed his face. "Lafitte, Robin, fall back to the ship. I'll test their strength." He knew exactly why they'd come. The Great Sea Lane's naval base had been attacked, and he was the prime target. Leading the assault as a lieutenant general, flanked by a squadron of rear admirals and swarms of elite captains. Lafitte and Robin could handle a handful of seasoned officers, but against multiple flag-ranked commanders and their veteran troops, they'd be overwhelmed. Yet Nethin wasn't intimidated by numbers. He trusted his own skill and his willingness to exploit the narrow, winding streets if things went south. Even in a mixed civilian district like this, a quick, strategic withdrawal was well within his capabilities. "Move," Nethin barked. Lafitte and Robin spun on their heels and sprinted toward the harbor, leaving Nethin alone at the center of the street. He drew a deep breath, letting the tension sharpen his senses. Then, with a single nod, he stepped forward to meet the enemy. Whether he emerged victorious or slipping away unseen, Nethin was determined to make them regret underestimating him. Chapter X: The Ghost Shadow's Advantage. The Ghost Shadow's true strength lay not in its cannonade, but in its uncanny speed. It might not outgun the Navy's warships, but a burst of acceleration was all it needed to slip away. Pursuers, no matter how desperate, could only watch the Ghost Shadow dissolve into the clouds above as it made its escape. "Captain," Nethin called with a half-smile, "I'd like to tango with these naval vessels for a while. Miss Intelligence Officer, please return to the ship first." Lafitte chuckled, tapping his cane against the cobblestones. "Very well. Have at them, Nethin." Robin offered a serene nod, her calm unshaken. Unlike Zoro, she never got lost. Unlike Sanji, she never swooned at the sight of a pretty face. She was more than capable of handling the Ghost Shadow's helm in their absence. "Take care," she said softly, already moving to climb back aboard. Nethin inclined his head. "Understood." Confident that Lafitte and Robin could break the naval blockade, or, if need be, beat a swift retreat, Nethin sprinted toward the nearest cannon. The moment he fired, the gun battle on Beth Street stuttered to a halt, smoke cleared, and the civilians and nobles who had fled in terror froze in place, stunned by the sudden lull. But the quiet would not last for long. Nethin stood among the onlookers, his heart still pounding from the earlier gunfight. Barely an hour had passed, and already the Navy was sweeping into Bass Street in overwhelming numbers. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Under normal protocol, they'd only arrive once a skirmish was fully under control, never so swiftly. Nor did they usually send such a massive force. Soldiers in crisp uniforms extended down every alley, forming a ring of blue steel resolve around the entire district. It was clearly meant as an encirclement, a positional siege rather than a simple investigation. "Have you ever seen them move like this?" A merchant beside Nethin muttered, frowning. He glanced at the endless ranks of Navy personnel, then shook his head. "No, something's odd." "Maybe they're here to protect some VIP," another bystander suggested, voice low. "Bay Street's right in the heart of this country's famed hot spring region. Nobles come here for rest, if not relaxation. Perhaps someone important slipped in." "That doesn't explain the scale," the first man countered, his eyes flickering with unease. He pointed toward a raised platform near the docks, where a silver-adorned flag snapped in the breeze. "Look, they've dispatched a lieutenant admiral." A silent hush fell. The presence of an officer that high up the chain of command meant something far bigger was unfolding than mere crowd control, or a protective detail. Nethin swallowed. Whatever was coming next, it would sweep up Bass Street, and everyone on it. I turned toward the front and saw a tall officer cloaked in the Navy's justice mantle, the twin epaulettes of a lieutenant general gleaming on his shoulders. His expression was as cold and unyielding as iron. This was Lieutenant General Dalmizia of the G8 branch. Behind him fell in 3 rear admirals, each awaiting orders. Dalmizia's voice rang out across the deck. "Rear Admiral Asius, take the second team and advance from the west. Rear Admiral Heiser, lead the third team in from the south. Rear Admiral Rohan, you have the fourth team, move up from the north. Your objective is to seal off Beth Street completely. No ghost pirates from the Sea of Phantoms are to slip through. And one more thing, he added, eyes sweeping the officers. The moment you locate the so-called ghost hand roads, do not engage in a prolonged fight. Capture them alive and report directly to me. Understood? Each admiral snapped a sharp salute. As they turned to deploy their forces, Nethan felt a surge of determination. The hunt for Rhodes was on, and failure was not an option. Chapter 71. Clash at Admiral Dalmesia's command, the three rear admirals snapped to attention and, without so much as a backward glance, turned and led their squadrons away. Once the last gap was sealed, Dalmesia himself guided the lead fleet to guard the eastern entrance of Beth Street. The notorious ghost hand pirates, the very scourge that had tormented Admiral Doberman, were finally within reach. Dalmesia cracked his knuckles. The sharp hiss of armament hockey crackling across his gauntlets filled the air. A thin, confident smile tugged at his lips. He and Doberman served under the same flag. Though Doberman's greater feats had already secured him a promotion to vice admiral, Dalmesia was close behind. One more decisive victory, and he too would earn the rank of rear admiral. Above all, he'd heard the rumors about the pirates' captain, Nethan, the ghost hand, and his feared spider's web technique. The Navy's high command had entrusted that ghost spider to Nethan's care, a fact Dalmesia took very seriously. Even with a bounty of only 92 million belly, and despite having only recently broken into the Grand Line from the West Blue, Nethan was no pushover. Dalmesia steeled himself. He would not make the mistake of underestimating this rising pirate star. At the G8 branch base, 4 major admirals were assigned, but Nethan had ordered 3 of them here, along with their elite detachments. Nearly 3/4 of the entire garrison had gathered at this single rally point. There would be no way for Rhodes to slip away or to rebuild his strength. By now the word had already spread. The Navy's mission was to eradicate the ghost hand pirates. First, it whispered through camp offices, then it thundered across the countryside until everyone in the country had heard it. Ghost hand pirates, a sergeant murmured, frowning at the massed fleet on the horizon. I've never even heard that name. Why throw away so many ships for some unknown pirate band? An ensign beside him let out a derisive laugh. Unknown, you say? Last week's Gazette ran a feature on them. They're supposed to be the most vicious pirates in the West Sea, so vicious that they routed an entire squadron under a major admiral's command. Rhodes himself led that attack. At the mention of a major admiral's defeat, a ripple of astonishment went through the onlookers. To them, a major admiral wasn't just another officer. He ranked with the highest generals in the Navy. If Rhodes could humble a commander of that caliber, then the ghost hand pirates were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Nethan stood at the edge of the Bez district's main thoroughfare, watching in stunned silence as squadron after squadron of naval vessels slipped into the harbor. Word had spread like wildfire. The recent outbreak of violence in the streets was the work of the infamous ghost hand pirates. Under Vice Admiral Caldwell's direct orders, dozens of landing parties had fanned out through the neighborhood, evacuating nobles and commoners alike. Carts and carriages rolled out in orderly convoys. No one argued, no one balked. After all, when cannon fire and cutlass clashes erupt without warning, you don't wait to be asked twice. What's their bounty now? Nethan overheard one merchant ask. 92 million berries, they say. Hard to believe a crew that feared could show up here, another replied. But thank the heavens we didn't cross paths with them. Those cutthroats kill without remorse. A nervous laugh rippled through the group. Ever since the Navy dispatched Vice Admiral Caldwell himself, however, panic had begun to ebb. With an officer of that rank on the scene and a full fleet backing him, the ghost hand pirates wouldn't be disappearing into the mist anytime soon. Nethan glanced up at the warships lining the quay. Thousands of blue-jacketed sailors formed a human barrier around the district's perimeter, their rifles trained toward the narrow alleys and side streets. It was an astonishing sight, like watching an iron wall come to life. Even the most tlea-hardened nobles admitted they'd never seen such a show of force in Bez. Pirates are our worst nightmare, one aristocrat muttered. Once they set sights on a merchant convoy, there's no telling who survives. But not today, said his companion firmly. With Caldwell and his fleet in command, we're safe, at least for now. Nathan exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. The evacuation would continue until every last civilian was clear. Then the Navy would move in, drive those fiends back to the open sea, and restore order. At least, that was the plan. And with a vice admiral at the helm, he had every reason to believe it would work. Even a bounty of 100 or 200 million couldn't guarantee a pirate a safe or easy capture. Bay Street lay deserted. Its residents had fled hours ago, leaving the buildings dark and silent. In their place came the Imperial Navy in full force. Hundreds of sailors advancing in tight ranks, swords drawn and muskets at the ready, sweeping the avenue like an unstoppable tide. Major General Azius led the column, steel blade in hand, his face set in a hard line. "Keep your eyes open," he ordered. "These are the ghost hand pirates we're after. Don't let their small numbers fool you. We'll take casualties, so stay sharp." "Aye, sir," rang the reply, echoing along the empty street. Though many of the men had heard the grisly tales of the ghost hand pirates, marching shoulder to shoulder behind their officers bolstered their courage. They pressed on until they reached a shadowed stretch of road where lanterns flickered but cast more gloom than light. Suddenly, Azius halted, every muscle tensing as he focused on a lone figure emerging from the darkness. A soft, mocking laugh drifted across the street. Well, Major General Azius, you've brought quite the army for one man." The figure stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight, revealing a tall, lean man wearing a tattered coat embroidered with a ghostly hand, Lafitte, quartermaster of the Ghost Hand Pirates. Azius leveled his sword. "Drop the theatrics, Lafitte. Surrender now, or we will kill you on sight." Lafitte's grin widened. "Surrender? Hardly. I'd sooner die standing beside my brothers." With that, two more silhouettes detached themselves from the gloom, flanking him. So it was, 3 men against the might of the Imperial Navy. The challenge had been laid. Now all that remained was to see whose blade would fall first. Although there was no official bounty on Nathan, his face had already been plastered on wanted posters across the seas. Now, surrounded by flashing musket barrels, he showed no sign of fear, only that unsettling half-smile. "What if I say no?" he asked coolly. "Then, shoot him on the spot." Commander Azius snarled, his blade cutting a silver arc through the air as he lunged. Normally, if he'd encountered someone like Rhodes, Azius would have signaled Dalmesia's fleet, remained on high alert, and bought himself time. But this man had no known ties or rewards attached to his head. He saw no reason to be cautious. His assumptions proved disastrously wrong. Azius drove his sword home, expecting to feel resistance, and instead came through only cloth. He froze. Before he could pull back, Nethan appeared at the far edge of the naval camp, perfectly still, casually spinning a polished mahogany cane between his fingertips. Then pandemonium broke out. Sailors, confused by Nethan's sudden maneuver, leveled muskets at one another. Shouts turned to gunfire. A group of Marines spun, bayonets brandished, and surged toward Azius, screaming their battle cries. "Damn you! What have you done?" Azius shouted, rage and disbelief warping his voice as he tried to regroup in the chaos. Nathan hadn't expected Lafitte to possess such a trick. Ducking aside as his soldiers' bullets tore into the pavement, he surged forward toward the grinning agent. Lafitte's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Ho ho ho, you're already under my sway." Down by the docks, Lafitte and Azius's naval squadron were locked in fierce combat. Cannon, OK, and splintered wood filled the air. Meanwhile, around the corner, Major General Heiser of the Branch Fleet found himself face-to-face with Ghost Hand Rhodes, Nethan's notorious alias. Rhodes stood calmly at the mouth of a narrow alley, as if waiting for the general. The instant Heiser recognized him, his expression snapped to alertness. He signaled for reinforcements to alert Dalmesia's command, then drew 2 exquisitely crafted muskets, training both barrels on Nethan. "You're under arrest, Ghost Hand Rhodes," Heiser barked. "Don't even think of moving, or I'll turn you into Swiss cheese." Nethan lifted his gaze, utterly unperturbed. He made no move to surrender. No flicker of panic crossed his face. To him, this was nothing more than a hollow threat. With a soft exhale, He stepped forward and, without breaking his composure, shaped both hands into a strangling motion aimed at the general and his men. Boom! Nethin's heart leapt as the ground convulsed beneath him. In an instant, the earth split open, fissures crawling inch by inch under the twisted fruit's corrupting power. The cracks fanned outward, tearing through the landscape like hungry veins. Around Shizi's position, the very air seemed to warp as the force bent every nearby building like rubber, drawing their walls inward until they buckled and collapsed toward the widening chasm. Chapter 72. Two Major Generals. Earth-shaking rumbles rolled down the narrow street as the two rows of buildings on either side twisted grotesquely. The navies, muskets clutched tight in gloved hands, stared in horror, terror flashing across their faces. "Hold them up! Don't let them collapse!" some captains screamed. Drawing their swords, others charged toward the leaning walls, hauling at fallen beams and propping up stonework with bare arms. But the buildings buckled and cracked again, the twisting force snapping through timber and mortar and into their bodies. Men cried out as sharp, searing pain shot through their limbs, as though their very muscles were being wrenched apart. Suddenly, a mighty crash echoed off the walls. With a groan of stone and timber, the second floor gave way. Chunks of masonry rained down, filling the street with dust and rubble. It seemed as though the buildings were squeezing the alley tighter and tighter, ready to crush everything between them. Then, slicing through the chaos like a bolt of lightning, a brilliant shaft of swordlight cleaved the street in two. The crushing walls halted their advance, as if an invisible wedge had split the earth itself, leaving a jagged crack in the stone pavement. Through the gap strode a compact figure in a navy justice cloak. Broad shoulders bore the twin silver epaulettes of a major general. His dark hair was cropped close, his eyes, calm and alert, swept over the scene. "General Nethin!" Several officers saluted hastily, staggering forward. Nethin moved with surprising speed. He planted one booted foot at the edge of the fissure, placed both hands on his sword hilt, and in a single, fluid motion, drove the blade down into the crack. A blinding shockwave rippled through the street, shattering the leaning walls so that they collapsed outward, away from the center, sending debris tumbling harmlessly to the sides. When the dust cleared, the passage stood open once more. Nithin withdrew his sword and looked up at Heiser, who lay pinned beneath a fallen beam at the far end of the street. Turning to his aide, Nithin's voice was firm but edged with concern. "Heiser, are you all right?" Rohan hewed through the fallen beams and rushed forward, his greatsword slicing the tangle of debris in half. Beneath the rubble, Heiser braced himself against a cracked pillar, his arms trembling as he tried to keep it from crushing him. Rohan's voice, low and commanding, cut through the dust. "Heiser, are you all right?" Heiser shook out his aching wrist, then looked up. Across the ruined chamber, Nethin stood unharmed, his calm gaze fixed on them both. A flicker of horror crossed Heiser's face. "I'm fine," he panted. "What about Lieutenant General Dalmesia?" "Almost here," Rohan replied. He turned, planting his boots firmly on the shattered floor, and gripped the hilt of his blade with both hands. His eyes narrowed as he studied Nethin. "Hold him here. Don't let him slip away before Dalmesia arrives." Heiser straightened, echoing Rohan's resolve. Together, they blocked the only clear exit. Both men knew the truth already. Nethin had slain the ghost spider, the headquarters' feared major general. Alone, neither Rohan nor Heiser believed they could match the strength that had felled the ghost spider, but together they might just stall him long enough. And when Lieutenant General Dalmesia joined them, this ghost hand conspiracy would end. From his vantage point amid the ruin, Nethin's expression never wavered. Rohan's order hung in the air, an unspoken accusation of cowardice. "Run!" Nethin's voice was soft, almost amused. He brushed a fine layer of ash from his shoulder and took a deliberate step forward. "What makes you think I'd run at all?" In these waters, most pirates turn and run the moment they spot a Navy vessel. Even when the chasing fleet isn't strong enough to wipe them out, only the rarest crews dare stand and fight. The truth is that pirates are scattered like stars across the sea, while the Navy operates as a united force. Slaying a pursuing squadron might bring momentary satisfaction, but it only provokes harsher reprisals and weakens a pirate crew's standing among its peers. Aside from the Revolutionary Army, Virtually no pirate captains risk a head-on clash with the government fleets. Strength or weakness of the pursuing warships matters little. Escape is always their first choice. Nathan Rhodes is no ordinary pirate. Whenever he spots a Navy vessel on the horizon, he doesn't plot a course for the nearest hiding spot. He prepares for battle. That defiance isn't born of mere bravado. He sees the Navy itself as his enemy. With its rigid talent evaluation system and absolute authority, the Navy and Nathan stand at odds by design. Predator versus prey, locked in a conflict neither can ignore nor resolve. Rowan's eyes flickered at Nathan's words, his expression shifting as he absorbed the weight of what his friend had just revealed. Rowan watched in stunned disbelief as Nathan simply refused to back down from the Navy's approaching fleet. Every pirate Rowan had ever known would have scattered at the sight of those warships, but not Nathan. He stood there, calm and unmoving, as though daring the entire Navy to come at him. Madness, Rowan thought. Pure, incomprehensible madness. Then Nathan sprang into action. In a blur of movement, he activated the Navy 6-style shaver. His form split into several overlapping afterimages as he tore forward, both fists cocked for attack, one aimed at Rohan, the other at Heiser. "Incoming!" Heiser yelled, startled at Nathan's sheer audacity. He'd never seen anyone confront the Navy this directly, and the boldness rattled him. Rowan and Heiser met Nathan head-on. Rowan gripped his greatsword with both hands and swung a massive arc toward Nathan's right fist. "Yi Dao Liu, Wei Gu," he intoned, the words of his forging mantra echoing in the cool sea air. Steel met steel in a thunderous clang as Rohan's blade halted Nathan's punch. Sparks flew where the sword struck the fractured edge of the shaver technique. The shockwave rippled through the deck, and dust and splinters scattered into the night. Nathan's head whipped back at the impact, but his eyes gleamed with exhilaration rather than pain. He grinned fiercely and twisted his wrist, deflecting Rohan's blade aside in a spray of sparks. Then, using the momentum, he lashed out with his left fist at Heiser. "Now!" Rowan roared. He planted his feet and thrust his sword forward, driving Heiser to the side to dodge Nathan's second blow. Heiser stumbled back, alarm and admiration mingling on his face. I've never seen anything like this," he managed, bracing himself for the next exchange. As the Navy's ships loomed in the distance, their deck lights glaring like watchful eyes, the three pirates squared off under a canopy of stars. Madness or not, Nathan was determined to stand his ground. And against any odds, Rohan and Heiser had no choice but to follow his lead. Heiser's eyes locked onto Nathan's form. As Nathan's fist came crashing in, Heiser sprang back, spinning his twin pistols to fire a barrage of seastone bullets. Boom! At the same moment, Nathan's giant sword swept down in a devastating arc. The blade struck Heiser like an axe chopping through a rotten trunk, jarring him hard enough to send him sprawling backward. His arm throbbed with pain, and the edge of his blade bent and nicked. The seastone bullets Heiser had fired never stood a chance. Nathan only tilted his head and shifted his shoulders, slipping through the scattered shots with ease. To someone who has mastered conqueror's hockey or armament hockey, seastone is virtually powerless. Some fighters' bodies are so tough that not even a direct hit can break their skin. Is this the rear admiral of the Grand Line? Heiser thought, stunned. He looked no different from any other elite officer, yet his strength was on another level entirely. Nathan slid sideways, turning his shoulders just enough to let the hail of stone bullets whistle past him. He lifted his gaze calmly toward Heiser, and in the same instant, he vanished like a soap bubble popping. Heiser's blue ran cold. His target had simply disappeared. A shiver raced down his spine. Driven by fear, he unleashed the Navy's sixth-form paper seal technique at full power. Whoosh! Before Heiser could even steady himself, Nathan reappeared at his side and struck with a crushing punch. Though Heiser's paper seal form let him twist away from the blow's center, Nathan's knuckles still grazed his shoulder, driving a sickening torque through the joint. A sharp crack echoed in the clearing as Heiser cried out, staggered back, and clutched his arm in agony. Behind him, Rohan charged forward, eyes widening at the sight of Heiser's grotesquely bent shoulder. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead as he bit back a curse, hefted his greatsword, and swung it in a desperate arc toward Nathan. But Nathan did not flinch. Nathan's eyes were calm and detached as he caught the giant sword's blade with the back of his hand. A coil of twisting power surged through his palm as his fingers clenched around the massive weapon. With a sharp crack, the 2-meter-long blade snapped cleanly in half, the broken segment spiraling through the air toward Rohan. Chapter 73, Dalmesia. Nethin released his grip and stepped back without hesitation, but the twisting force still left its mark. A sudden, stabbing pain flared in his palm. Glancing down in alarm, he saw a web of broken vessels spreading beneath his skin. Major General Rohan! Major General Heiser! A dozen naval captains standing nearby stared in stunned disbelief. They had never imagined Nethin could rout Rohan and Heiser, two of the G8 base's mightiest officers, in a matter of moments. At G8, only Asius and Lieutenant General Dalmesia surpassed Rohan and Heiser in raw power. Even in training, a team of elite captains had never matched the pair when they combined offense and defense. Not even a major general from headquarters could have forced them back so easily. Yet here they were, outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by Nethin's seemingly effortless technique. Before anyone could process what had happened, a Navy colonel snapped to attention. Drawing his sidearm, he barked orders to his subordinates. Cover them. Fall back to support Major General Rohan and Major General Heiser, now! As the colonel led the charge, Nethin braced himself. Whatever came next, he knew the real battle was only just beginning. Nethin stood his ground as the elite sailors of the G8 base poured in, rifles at the ready. Though their orders drove them forward, their hearts thudded with fear. Around him, columns of naval troops fanned out, aiming to overwhelm him by sheer numbers. But Nethin's gaze stayed cool and unflinching. He felt nothing against those who merely obeyed orders. So long as they didn't cross him first, he had no quarrel with them. Yet anyone who tried to take him down became, in his eyes, an enemy, and to his enemies he was utterly merciless. With a sudden roar, Nethin lifted one booted foot and slammed it into the blue stone pavement. A spiraling force snaked outward from the point of impact, digging through cracked stone and shaking the earth itself. A moment later, the ground beneath him twisted and buckled. Thick rectangular slabs fractured along fault lines, tilting and rotating as if caught in some colossal whirlpool. "Vortex strangulation!" Nethin intoned under his breath. In seconds, the trembling circle widened, 10 meters, 20, 30, until the center of the disturbance spanned nearly 50 meters in every direction. Sailors who had been closing in found themselves helplessly dragged toward Nethin's epicenter, their boots scuffing and sliding as the ground convulsed beneath them. Guns bobbed in unsteady hands. Shouts dissolved into cries of panic. At the heart of the upheaval, Nethin remained as still and unyielding as a stone pillar, his pale eyes fixed on the rippling ring that held his attackers captive. Around him, the blue stone tiles keeled and spun, sealing off any hope of a clean shot. The elite forces of the G8 base had met their match, and in this swirling cage of his own making, Nethin was already calculating his next move. Lieutenant Nethin barely had time to register the change beneath his feet before the world around him went mad. In an instant, stone, soil, even the wooden buildings of the plaza began to twist as though they were crests and troughs of a giant counterclockwise wave. "What in the—" he gasped, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of shifting earth. Around him, the other naval officers froze, horror etched on every face. The ground's rotation was almost imperceptible at first, a faint wobble under polished boots. Then it gained speed, terrifyingly, impossibly fast. By the end of the first second, cobblestones buckled like a broken turntable. Nethin stumbled, fighting to stay upright as deep fissures raced outward from the plaza's center. In the next heartbeat, 2 seconds in all, rooftops groaned and walls collapsed in showers of splintered timber and crumbling masonry. 3 seconds. The heart of Rhodes, a circular area some 50 meters across, had been transformed into a roiling, muddy pit. Bloated surges of water and soil twisted skyward, forming a swampy vortex that devoured everything in its path. Nethin braced himself against a fragment of shattered wall, but it crumbled the moment he touched it. He saw men flung off their feet, their limbs caught between slabs of rock and wood. Some tried to crawl to safety, others simply vanished beneath the grinding swirl of debris. By 5 seconds, every building around him was reduced to rubble. The air filled with a choking mix of dust, splintered beams, and the silent snap of bones. Captains and lieutenants alike were sucked into the maelstrom, their their desperate shouts cut short. Nethin's muscles screamed as he clawed at the ground for purchase, but the vortex held him fast, inching him closer to its center. All around him, the plaza sank deeper into the earth's twisted maw. And as the mudslide claimed its final victims, Nethin realized that whatever force had wrought this devastation was far beyond anything he had ever faced. General Heiser and General Rohan had both rushed to stop Nethin, but within moments they paid a terrible price. Each lost an arm to the ravenous vortex he'd summoned. Helpless, they staggered aside and watched in horror as the maelstrom turned the surrounding earth into a spinning grindstone, shredding everything that came within its reach. 50 meters out, the assembled navy froze in terror, faces pale, hearts pounding. Not a soul dared step closer. In barely 5 seconds, the world within 100 meters of the vortex lay in ruin. Cracked earth, splintered timber, and mangled bodies piled high in a scene too ghastly to describe. By the 7th second, most of the fleet's captains lay dead or dying. Only 2 or 3 colonels still stood, leaning on makeshift supports alongside the bleeding generals. And then, as the 8th second ticked by, a roar of defiance tore across the battlefield. "You bastard! Stop this madness!" Nethin hardly had a moment's warning before a figure slammed out of the vortex and rocketed straight at him. The newcomer's fist was clenched tight, his aura shifting into an oppressive, inky black. Nethin was driven backward, skidding across the ground. Vice Admiral Dalmasia, he thought, recognizing the force of raw physical power about to strike. But he didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on Dalmasia as the Admiral's punch descended. In that instant, Nethin withdrew the distortion energy he'd been anchoring in the earth beneath him and channeled it into his own arm. He twisted his body into a coiling arc and launched himself upward to meet the blow head-on. The impact detonated like a thunderclap. Dalmasia's pure, concentrated might clashed with Nethin's warped, reality-bending force. A shockwave ripped outward in all directions. Dust and debris shot into the sky, blanketing the entire Bass district in a choking haze. The blast even reached the front lines, where Lafitte and Asius were battling, rattling their shields and momentarily blurring the horizon. When the echo finally faded, Nethin and Dalmasia hovered in the settling dust storm, each assessing the other for the next move. The air crackled with residual distortion, and neither fighter would back down. The roar of the shockwave still echoed across the deck. Several Navy sailors who'd stood too close were thrown off their feet, bodies swaying as they fought to stay upright, their eyes stinging from the gale. At last, it seemed, our lieutenant general had come face to face with their captain. Lafitte clutched the brim of his top hat with one hand, keeping it from blowing away, and let out a low chuckle as he regarded Rear Admiral Asius. The admiral's uniform was spattered with blood, not his own, but that of his fallen men. He narrowed his eyes, watching the distant collision of mighty vessels with an icy calm. "Well now," Lafitte drawled, "it looks as if your captain's about to fall, and you along with him." "Ha!" Asius replied, a cold smile tugging at his lips. "I wouldn't bet on that, Rear Admiral Lafitte. Maybe it'll be you who meets your end first." Lafitte raised an eyebrow, but Asius didn't waver. His voice was steady, each back word dripping with icy certainty. "No, you've got it all wrong. You've never truly understood Lieutenant General Dalmasia's power. If you had, you'd never jest so lightly. You'd only know despair." Chapter 74, Duel Against the Branch Lieutenant General. When the dust finally settled, the vortex that had torn the earth asunder stilled, leaving a silent wasteland. Crimson blood pooled across the scarred ground, mingling with fragments of shattered bone. At the center of this carnage stood Nethin, muscles taut in a pushing fist stance. Opposite him, Branch Lieutenant General Dalmasia mirrored the pose, their fists pressed together and quivering under the force each exerted. For a heartbeat, neither yielded. Then, with a sudden shudder, Nethin dropped back 2 paces, and Dalmasia followed suit. Both warriors' arms trembled, but neither had gained the clear advantage. Dalmasia's eyes blazed. He had unleashed everything in that single clash, aiming to halt Nethin's onslaught by disrupting his vortex strangulation technique. Yet, despite his power and precision, Dalmasia could only force a stalemate, and that failure stung him deeply. Survivors of the skirmish, Rohan and Heiser watched in tense silence. They had seen Dalmesia's opening strike nearly tear Nethin's attack apart. They understood how close their commander had come to turning the tide. Now, Dalmesia glanced coolly at Nethin, then swept a hand in a swift gesture. Rohan and Heiser obeyed instantly, stepping back to give their lieutenant general room to breathe and recover. The clearing's eerie stillness stretched on, broken only by the distant drip of blood onto scorched earth. Both warriors stood their ground, chests heaving, each awaiting the other's next move. In that suspended moment, they knew the battle was far from over, and that only one would walk away victorious. Rohan and Heiser exchanged a quick glance before stepping aside to tend their wounds. Nethin, meanwhile, took 2 deliberate steps back and met Vice Admiral Dalmesia's gaze without a flicker of fear. His eyes drifted to the Admiral's epaulette, the senior stripe that marked him among the fleet's highest ranks. Nethin allowed himself a brief, inward smile. It had taken him nearly 2 years to climb from an unknown scallywag in the West Blue to a name whispered across all 7 seas. He'd done it by his own grit and guile, no patron or legendary halo to shield him, just hard lessons learned in every skirmish. Dalmesia's eyes roamed the battlefield. Shattered hulls, splintered debris, and blood-stained planks lay everywhere. Although he'd pursued pirates through firestorms and seen entire villages reduced to ash, the carnage before him was on another level. It was easy to understand why the Admiralty had branded this man the most murderous, the most dangerous pirate alive. Anger flared in Dalmesia's chest. "I swear," he snarled, voice low and cold, "I won't let you roam these seas unchecked ever again." He leaned in, his stare sharp enough to slice steel, but Nethin didn't waver. Calm and unbroken, he simply stood his ground. "Anyone who dares to cross me becomes my enemy, and I grant my enemies no mercy. After all, it was your navy that made me what I am today, wasn't it?" Nethin's voice was calm, almost cold, as he faced Vice Admiral Dalmesia. At once, Dalmesia's expression darkened. He was a vice admiral, with contacts everywhere in the fleet, and from the moment he received orders to capture Nethin, he'd understood the full story. He didn't blame Admiral Doberman's judgment, but who could have foreseen that a mere pirate hunter from the western seas would slaughter an entire naval detachment, rise at a breakneck pace, and earn a commander's commission? It was a baffling and infuriating turn of events. "Enough talk," Dalmesia growled. With that, he lunged forward, determined to seize Nethin by force. Nethin's mastery of martial arts and his domineering body technique allowed him to cross several blocks and arrive on the battlefield in mere seconds. In that instant, he shattered Rhodes's vortex strangulation, freeing Rohan and Generals Heiser and Dalmesia from certain doom. His speed was nothing short of astonishing. Whoosh! Before anyone could blink, Nethin closed the 5-step disc route, Tance separating him from Rhodes, and slammed a fierce punch into Rhodes's jaw. Even as the blow landed, Rhodes's mind remained perfectly calm. It was in this state of serenity that he chose to activate his own domineering body technique. Though Nethin's speed outstripped his own, Rhodes's heightened perception allowed him to react in time. Boom! Their clash erupted in a thunderous shockwave. This was their second encounter. Nethin charging in with everything he had, Rhodes standing firm and meeting him blow for blow. Their fists collided, energy rippling through the air. Nethin couldn't fully deploy his domineering body power, and Rhodes only partially engaged the depth distortion energy within him, yet neither fighter yielded. The force of their impact held them in perfect stalemate, but Rhodes refused to let Nethin dictate the terms. As their struggle peaked, he channeled every last ounce of his distortion technique. His body twisted, limbs blurred, and in a heartbeat, he unleashed a rapid-fire barrage of crushing punches, each one aimed to break through Nethin's defenses and turn the tide of battle. Dalmesia snorted coldly. Jet-black armor crawled up her arms like living shadows as she squared off against Nethin. Boom! 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 Each thunderous impact sent shockwaves across the ground. Nethin, having dispelled the excess flare of his initial burst, now focused his distortion power with deadly precision. In a blur of motion, he struck her a dozen times in rapid succession. Despite the raw strength of her armored limbs, slightly above that of a ghost spider's, Dalmesia lacked the finesse of a swordswoman. Nethin, by contrast, had grown immensely since his fight with the phantom spiders. Even under the surprise of her attack, he held firm and forced her backward. Dalmesia stumbled, her arm tingling with numbness. She glared up at Nethan, a flicker of astonishment in her eyes. "The fully evolved, twisted fruit," she whispered, voice edged with reluctant respect. "I never imagined you'd master it so completely." Back when he was still a colonel, Nethan first ran into a pirate imbued with the power of that devil fruit. The pirate had slaughtered his crewmates. Trouble followed in the wake of each new ability the fruit granted. Back then, the fruit's might was nothing more than a nuisance to Nethan. Now, after all these years, Nethan's own strength has grown dozens of times over. Yet when the same devil fruit re-emerged and fell into his hands, its true power far exceeded anything he'd faced before. "You've seen what this fruit can do," Rhodes observed, his voice calm and measured. He betrayed no surprise. After all, devil fruits are reborn somewhere in the world within a few years of their previous user's death. This wasn't the first person ever to wield its twisted gifts. True, Dalmesia's tone was cool and detached. That last pirate was nothing compared to you. Hard to believe anyone could get so much out of what's generally considered a weaker fruit. Nethan smiled, unruffled. "No devil fruit is weak," he corrected her gently. "Every power has its uses. Developing this ability to such heights came down to careful study and relentless practice." A sudden gust of wind swept past them, carrying the promise of a new trial on the horizon. The instant the command rang out, Nethan surged forward toward Dalmesia, launching a daring counterattack. Though Dalmesia's reflexes were faster, Nethan's keen battle instincts and overwhelming aura let him read every subtle movement. Even at a slight speed disadvantage, he managed to keep pace. "Twisted fist!" Nethan bellowed, curling his fingers into a lethal grip before unleashing a brutal punch. Dalmesia regarded him coolly. He didn't flinch under the force of Nethan's blow, which was more vicious than anything he'd shown before, but instead wore a faint, disdainful smile. "Devil fruit, you say?" Dalmesia drawled, his eyes gleaming. "Believe me, you're not the only one who's had the pleasure." Chapter 75, Overwhelming Suppression. Hum! In an instant, a surge of energy blasted from Dalmesia's body. His skin rippled into black and white spots, 2 long ears sprouted from the sides of his cheeks, and his upper body muscles ballooned to twice their normal size. The fauna dog fruit, Dalmatian form, had awakened. Though it was ranked among the weaker zoan-type devil fruits, its strength boost was undeniable, especially for someone whose fighting style revolved around raw power. Every swing, every step, carried more force than before. Just as expected, the lieutenant general had to call upon his own special ability. Without it, even a high-ranking officer like him would have been hard-pressed to contain Dalmesia's newfound ferocity. But when he shifted into his half-orc form, he discovered to his dismay that his strength and speed were actually diminished compared to his peak human condition. Nearby, Rohan and Heiser, having just treated their wounds, moved into position to seal off any escape routes. They knew they could never trade blows with Nethan directly, but they didn't need to. Their mission was simply to delay him long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And with Dalmesia unleashed and the lieutenant general struggling in half-orc form, those reinforcements couldn't come a moment too soon. Nethan only needed the briefest instant to meet Dalmesia's blow, and there was nowhere left to run. On the open field, Dalmesia's devil fruit power had twisted him into a half-orc monstrosity, his fingers elongated into jagged claws, his muscles bulging beneath mottled skin. He curled those lethal claws into a fist, his arm blackening and hardening in an instant, then thundered forward, aiming straight at Nethan's guard. Their fists collided with an earth-shaking crack. Dust and shattered turf flew in all directions as both men poured every ounce of strength into the impact. Nethan's stance quivered only slightly under the shock. By contrast, Dalmesia staggered back, his massive frame pitching off balance. Even empowered by his half-orc transformation, he found himself outmatched, unable to push Nethan off his feet. Watching from the sidelines, Rohan, Heiser, and the others gaped in disbelief. None of them had ever seen Dalmesia driven back in a straight-up clash. No wonder the ghost spider fell before you, they thought, blinking at one another. Dalmesia's chest rose and fell as he steadied himself. His deep voice rumbled across the ruined circle of scorched earth, eyes burning with controlled fury. "Impressive," he rumbled, every syllable a warning. "But don't think you've won yet. Nethan didn't intend to back down, but his boots skidded on the cracked pavement. He spun away from Rhodes, curled his fingers into a snapping pose, and unleashed his flying finger gun. Two crackling energy bolts streaked toward Rhodes's chest, scorching twin holes through his coat and revealing a flash of pale skin. Yet before they could truly strike home, the twisted aura enveloping Rhodes shredded them apart, reducing the blasts to nothing more than drifting sparks. No time to gloat. Rhodes ignored Nethan's failed attack, and even brushed off a second shot from Dalmesia's own finger gun before reshaping his fist in midair. He thrust his hand forward, and a searing white flare erupted from his knuckles, forcing Dalmesia to slam his eyes shut against the brilliance. With a roar, Rhodes barreled into Dalmesia, delivering a thunderous punch to his chest. Though Dalmesia prided himself on physical supremacy, the sudden light and raw force caught him completely off guard. He flew backward with a crashing boom, his arms, hardened like steel, still going numb from the impact. "Damn it!" Dalmesia ground out under his breath. His vision spun, and he couldn't force his eyes open. Blinded, he had no choice but to track Nethan's movements by sound and silhouette, clinging to the arrogant belief that he could still react in time. But Rhodes was already on him again, fists flying in a relentless barrage. Against raw physical power, nothing beats the sting force of a well-placed punch. Everything else is just a way to carve out an opening. Boom, boom, boom. Nethan and Dalmesia trade blow after blow, and Nethan's arms go numb from the repeated impacts. He knows he's in trouble. Summoning his strength, Nethan springs upward, launching himself skyward with a crescent moon step. Dalmesia merely snorts, vaults off the ground in turn, and closes the distance, hammering at Nethan's flanks with a relentless aerial barrage. Nethan's vision clears, his eyes have recovered, but his head is pounding under the onslaught. Thinking fast, Nethan thrusts out a spinning kick aimed at Dalmesia's head. In one fluid motion, Dalmesia catches the foot with both hands, condenses the strike into a flickering orb of energy, and hurls it back at Nethan. Boom! Nethan slams a back fist into the orb, shattering it, but the force throws him off balance, and he lands awkwardly, suddenly on the defensive. Before he can recover, Dalmesia lunges in. Nethan barely has time to raise an arm before a brutal straight punch crashes into his shoulder, rattling his bones. He grits his teeth, knowing the next exchange will be even harder than the last. Nethan braced himself, with armament hockey on his shoulders, but Rhodes's merciless twisting force still tore through his defense, shooting a jolt of pain into his arm and rendering it completely numb. Instinctively, Nethan dropped from the sky. Airborne combat was already a gamble. Without solid ground underfoot, each punch lost much of its power, but thanks to his devil fruit ability, he could unleash full-strength blows no matter where he stood. His midair descent, therefore, wasn't as reckless as it might have been for an ordinary fighter. Rhodes wasted no time following him down. Both men hit the ground together, and the instant Rhodes's boot struck the earth, the ground beneath Nethan buckled and twisted. The distortion rippled outward, carving the battlefield into uneven ridges and craters. At a distance, the force of the quake would have diminished too much to seriously hamper a physically gifted warrior like Nethan, but that was precisely Rhodes's point. By reshaping the terrain, he forced Nethan to fight on uneven footing, turning the very earth against him. Dalmesia's footing suddenly slipped, and Nethan pounced on the opening without hesitation. Caught off guard, Dalmesia tried to bring up his other arm in a desperate counterstrike, but before he could land a blow, Nethan's fist exploded into his shoulder with thunderous force. Dalmesia's eyes widened as pain seared through his limbs. He was thrown off balance and slammed backwards onto the deck. Both arms tingled fiercely, numbness spreading so quickly that he could barely clench his fists. Nethan's flash step technique, so swift it leaves almost no warning, had turned the tide in an instant. As Dalmesia struggled to regain his bearings, Nethan pressed the advantage relentlessly, raining down strikes before Dalmesia could even raise a proper defense. The lieutenant general's massive frame quivered under each blow. He was forced into half blocks and frantic sidesteps, desperately seeking a moment to catch his breath and shake off the pins and needles burning through his arms. But Nethan pursued without mercy, never giving him so much as a pause. Watching from the sidelines, the other officers could hardly believe their eyes. Dalmesia was widely regarded as the strongest combatant in the entire G8 division. No other general, no matter how skilled, had ever bested him in one-on-one combat. Yet here he was, driven to his knees by this upstart, his defenses in tatters and his pride wounded. From the opening salvo until now, Dalmesia has never seized the advantage. Rhodes's legions have kept us on the defensive every step of the way. Lieutenant General Nethan clenched his jaw at the relentless pressure. If this continues, I fear our position will collapse entirely. Chapter 76, The Morgan's Shock. Nethan's assault was relentless, every attack honed to exploit the smallest opening, every strike flowing into the next without pause. Rohan and Heiser felt their hearts clench the moment they saw Dalmesia stagger under his onslaught. Exchanging a determined glance, they gritted their teeth and charged onto the field. Their arrival gave Dalmesia a fleeting chance to catch his breath, but it was a fragile reprieve. Had Dalmesia, Rohan, and Heiser been at full strength, their combined assault might have stood a chance against Nethan. Now, however, Rohan and Heiser each bore the burden of a half-crippled arm, and Dalmesia, his own force twisted and weakened by the aftermath of a previous distortion, could barely summon his power. Even united, they struggled to mount an effective defense. Boom, boom, boom. Outnumbered 1-3, Nethan kept his cool. His expression never wavered as he pressed forward, closing the distance with unwavering confidence. There was no hint of retreat in his eyes, only the cold certainty of victory. Nethan's attacks only grew more brutal with every strike. Already wounded, Generals Rohan and Heiser found themselves utterly unable to withstand his power. Blows tore through their defenses, sending them spitting up blood before crashing to the deck. A nearby naval colonel tried to charge in and lend support, but even his intervention couldn't save them. In moments, both senior officers lay defeated at his feet. Blessed with the power of spatial distortion, Nethan pressed his advantage without mercy. Once he claimed the upper hand, there was virtually no way for his foes to counterattack. Their defenses collapsed in a relentless, one-sided onslaught. Watching one man single-handedly overwhelm two major generals of the G8 branch base and the Dalmesian lieutenant general sent chills down every sailor's spine. The force of Nethan's ghost hand technique was simply staggering. 3 of their highest-ranking officers, united against him, had fallen in defeat, and all that remained of the fleet could only stand by in helpless awe. Rhodes' punch sent Dalmesia sprawling backward. Before the fallen general could recover, Rhodes spun on his heel, snatched the sword out of Rohan's grip with a savage backhand, and jabbed it forward, wrenching Rohan around in brutal arcs. Under Heiser's horrified stare, Nethan vaulted into the fray. He drove a kick into Heiser's chest, flipped him end over end, and slammed him against a distant building with such force that the entire facade crumbled. 2 major generals trapped inside perished instantly. Dalmesia's eyes burned with fury, but he'd lost his footing. Seizing a fleeting opening, he lunged at Rhodes from behind and landed a glancing blow. Rhodes, still locked in his assault on Heiser, pivoted and struck Dalmesia with a reverse punch. Boom! Their knuckles met, and Dalmesia's arm snapped under the impact. Gasping through the agony, Dalmesia shoved forward with his other hand, desperate to counterattack. Rhodes cut him off without hesitation, delivering a brutal backhand that sent Dalmesia's remaining weapon shattering to splinters. Bone fragments cracked and twisted beneath the strike. Dalmesia collapsed to the ground, utterly broken. "I'll take the Vice Admiral's head," Nethan declared, his voice as calm as ever. He folded his fingers into a blade-like shape and swept his arm in a single flawless arc. Without a drop of blood spraying out, the severed head rocketed skyward, frozen in an expression of utter disbelief. Dalmesia stared in stunned silence. She'd known Nethan was formidable. After all, he'd defeated the Ghost Spider, but she never imagined he could face down 3 full-fledged marshals at once and walk away without so much as a scratch. The outcome was nothing short of catastrophic for her side. Boom! The head landed on the cobblestones, the impact echoing through the deserted street. A soft sea breeze drifted in, carrying the metallic tang of blood. Ding-dong. A naval longsword clattered to the ground. Then ding-ding-dong-dong, as swords, daggers, and pistols slipped from numb hands, lining the street in a shining row. The sudden chorus of falling weapons only deepened the stunned silence. 100 meters down the road, on the top floor of the Harborview Hotel, Morgan watched the scene unfold through the wide window. His hand, clenched around a porcelain teacup, went limp. The cup slipped, hitting the floor with a crystalline crash that shattered the quiet. Nathan had done the impossible. He'd single-handedly smashed the Naval Branch's elite detachment, cutting down a lieutenant general and 2 major generals in swift succession. Such feats might be commonplace among the legends of the Great Sea, where strength abounds like drifting clouds, but Nathan was just setting foot on that path. Admiral Morgan studied the dispatch again, heart-pounding. Here stood a newcomer with the raw power to become the era's brightest supernova, perhaps even a future challenger to the New World's 4 emperors. It was time to gather more intelligence and file a full report at once. On the west side of Bass Street, the night wind carried the echo of clashing steel. Lafitte sprang onto the roof of a battered 2-story building, landing with the grace of a cat. A thin stream of blood curled from the corner of his mouth, yet a strange, almost gleeful smile played on his lips, a grin that froze anyone who met his eyes. Below, Asius leaned on his sword for support. His once pristine attire was shredded and soaked crimson. His body was a roadmap of cuts and bruises. Every breath he drew seemed to cost him a lifetime of pain, but he held his posture stiff, refusing to yield. Moonlight glinted off Lafitte's blade as he surveyed his opponent with cold amusement. Though both were grievously wounded, neither had yet found cause to surrender. Each man's battered form spoke of a battle fought to the brink, and of an unspoken determination that neither would break first. The streets of Beth lay littered with the bodies of fallen naval officers, some cut down by Lafitte's hand, but far more by ashes, driven as he was by Lafitte's hypnotic command. The scene recalled the horrors wrought by the ghost spider Doberman and his ilk. Comrades turned against one another, the very fabric of loyalty torn apart. From the chaos came a low, sinister laugh. Ho ho ho, an admiral who slaughters his own men, how perfectly monstrous. Lafitte didn't spare a thought to the blood at the corner of his mouth. Instead, he tilted his head back in amusement, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he spun his scarlet cane with careless grace. Then he fixed his gaze on Ashes, Asius, below him in the alley. Asius raised his chin. His eyes were ice. They died fulfilling their duty, he said quietly. They died to stop villains like you from preying on the sea. In a blur, Asius sprang onto a nearby rooftop, sword arcing toward Lafitte's unguarded flank. With a fluid sidestep, Lafitte evaded the strike, crimson coat swirling around him. Yet he offered no counterattack. Instead, he turned and looked down Beth Street's broad avenue, where Rhodes and Dalmesia were locked in their own brutal duel. The fight that had roared to life moments ago now hung suspended in the Admiral's ominous silence, its next move anticipated, but not yet made. Asius didn't bother to turn around. The dead silence behind him said all he needed to know. He fixed Lafitte with a cold stare and spoke evenly. It seems your captain, Nathan, has fallen. Your strength may exceed mine, but it was enough to stop you. There's nowhere left to run. You place your faith in your commander. But just as you trust yours, I have complete confidence in mine. A thin smile curved Asius's lips. Chapter 77. Do you regret it? Asius watched anxiously as Dalmesia squared off against the notorious ghost hand Rhodes. So far, neither Rohan nor Heiser had shown up to reinforce Dalmesia, which meant that Rhodes, a lieutenant general whose bounty rivaled that of the great pirates, was facing her almost entirely on his own. Behind him, 2 major generals, each only marginally weaker than Rhodes himself, completed the fearsome lineup. Dalmesia wasn't powerless, of course. In a straight duel, he matched Rhodes blow for blow, but Rhodes had employed cunning, energy-sapping techniques that left Dalmesia visibly battered and short of breath. If the fight dragged on, none of the reinforcements arriving later would stand a chance. They could only stall for time. Fortunately, the skirmish on the far flank had just reached its climax. Dalmesia needed only to hold out a little while longer before the tide turned in his favor. Steeling himself, he locked eyes with Rhodes and prepared to launch his next assault. Not finished yet, Lafitte. A sharp voice cut through the tension. Lafitte, breathing heavily, called back, Sorry, Captain. I've almost used up the last of my strength. Lafitte turned toward the source of the voice and offered a brief, apologetic nod. Ash's face went slack. He pivoted slowly, eyes widening, until he saw Nethan standing there, alive and unguarded. No, it can't be. Ash's heart thundered. Rhodes is here? Weren't Lieutenant General Dalmatia and Rohan closing him off on the eastern flank? How did he slip past their cordon? He searched the field behind Nethan. There was no sign of Dalmatia's troops, no Rohan cavalry, no one in pursuit. A sick realization twisted in his gut. Had headquarters known exactly how this would play out? Looking a bit distracted, Lafitte said, his tone almost amused. Before Ash could react, the elegant figure of the officer appeared at his side, mahogany cane in hand. Without a word, Lafitte drove the cane straight into Ash's chest. Ash lurched back, twisting to avoid the worst of the blow. But it was too late. The iron tip shattered ribs and sank deep. Pain flared, hot and blinding, and the world tilted. In that moment of agony, everything clicked. Headquarters had insisted on delaying the frontal assault, diverting Dalmatia and Rohan's forces into a tight encirclement. They'd known Rhodes, now standing here as Nethan, would attempt a breakout, and Ash had unwittingly walked right into their trap. The Dalmatian command and its senior officers had all but written off the Ghost Hand pirates, until now. They'd vastly underestimated them. Though the pirate crew numbered only 3 official members, their power could not be judged by head count alone. Goodbye. Lafitte's voice was quiet as he drew his crooked cane and thrust it forward. The tip found its mark in Ash's chest. When Lafitte pulled it free, Ash's body sagged to the deck. Rhodes watched the last Rear Admiral crumple with a thoughtful expression. Perhaps he could distill Lafitte's ruthless efficiency into new training protocols for Robin and the rest. At Navy headquarters, on one of the uppermost floors, 3 lieutenant generals gathered in a private office. General Doberman reclined in an armchair. Beside him sat Flying Squirrel and Firewood. Dalmatia's forces have located the Ghost Hand pirates, Doberman reported. They should be in custody by now. Flying Squirrel frowned. Is it wise to let G8 branch handle this alone? Their resources are stretched thin. Firewood tapped his fingers on the desk. If the rest of the fleet is still committed elsewhere, we may need a contingency. The Ghost Hand crew proved far deadlier than anticipated. Doberman nodded. I'll alert Admiral Nethan. He'll dispatch a detachment to reinforce G8. We can't afford another misstep. The 3 officers fell silent, each weighing the risks of an underestimated enemy and the urgent need to mobilize before the Ghost Hand pirates slipped through their grasp. General Huo Shaoshan sat across from General Doberman, waiting for a response. Doberman remained silent, contemplating the gravity of their situation. Then Flying Squirrel, who had been resting with his eyes closed, slowly opened them and spoke in a measured tone. Dalmatia's forces are nearly a match for ours, he reported. They've mobilized 3 units at their base. Sir, this is as cautious a move as we could expect from them. Doberman nodded solemnly. Any reinforcements from the nearby branch bases will take at least a month to reach the G8 sector at sea. We're relying on Dalmatia to hold the line. If not for the distance, I'd personally lead the operation against Nethan, but traveling from headquarters and marching his army here would take no less than 2 months. He paused, meeting the eyes of each officer around the table. Our best and fastest option is to dispatch rapid response troops directly from the G8 branch. We can't afford to wait. At that moment, the phone on the desk rang. In unison, the 3 lieutenants snapped to attention. Doberman strode over, lifted the receiver, and barked into it. Lieutenant General Doberman speaking. In his haste, he lost his grip. The handset slipped from his hand and crashed onto the polished red oak desk, the sharp clatter echoing through the suddenly hushed office. Flying Squirrel and Huoshan froze. Something was very wrong. Doberman sat at the command table, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely steady his gaze on the holo display. He looked neither angry nor simply shocked. His face was a mask of stunned disbelief. With a sharp intake of breath, he lurched back a step. Alarmed, Flying Squirrel jumped to his feet and snatched up the microphone that had fallen off the table. Huo Shaoshan hurried to Doberman's side. What happened? Did the siege collapse? Did the Ghost Hand pirates slip through our lines? Doberman closed his eyes for a moment, pressing a hand to his chest to steady the storm of emotions roiling inside him. Every sinew of his body trembled as he forced himself to reply. He shuffled toward the sofa, voice low and hollow. The encirclement failed, he said, each word heavy with grief. Dalmesia and our 3 supreme generals were all killed in battle. He sank onto the sofa, jaw clenched against the anguish threatening to overwhelm him. A single anguished question escaped him. Why? Why did it have to end like this? Nathan had brushed off the reports at first. Each one seemed routine, hardly worth his attention. Colonel Moby insisted the situation was firmly in hand. Major General Bastius assured him that Ghost Hand Rhodes would be delivered to Justice Island for trial any day now. The Ghost Spider swore he would return before long. Dalmesia promised she would leave the Ghost Hand pirates no opening to strike. And yet, despite these confident dispatches, events kept spinning beyond his control until even he felt powerless to stop them. He couldn't shake the echo of Rhodes's words from their meeting in the Western Sea. You may think me a nobody now, but remember what I say. Your orders today will chart the course of these waters. One day, you might look back and regret them, and by then it will be too late. In his mind, Rhodes stood before him, composed and unwavering, issuing that final, chilling question. Do you already regret it? For a heartbeat, Nathan froze. Then, recalling his duty as lieutenant general at headquarters, he forced himself back to the present. He let his shoulders settle, cleared his mind, and allowed his gaze to harden. There would be no more doubts, no hesitation. The time for second-guessing had passed. Nathan tapped the earbud and spoke quietly. Yes, I have regrets. Regrets for not spotting the threat sooner, for delaying the deployment of our ghost spiders to the West Sea, and for missing the chance to wipe out the Ghost Hand pirates at sea. He clicked the device off and fell silent for a heartbeat before turning to Doberman. Drawing in a steadying breath, Nathan met his lieutenant's eyes with a grave expression. Doberman, he said, we need to convene a full meeting. Across the cabin, Flying Squirrel glanced at Doberman. The 2 officers exchanged a knowing look, then both inclined their heads. Huo Xiaoshan, standing by the bulkhead, let out a long sigh and nodded in agreement. I'll relay the order to headquarters, he said. Under normal circumstances, only a pirate of Chihuahua's stature could demand a standalone summit at command. But the situation had grown desperate. The G8 branch base lay nearly in ruins, and simply rebuilding and reassigning its assets was already a monumental task. Never mind planning the next move against the Ghost Hand pirates. Chapter 78, Strengthening. A gray dawn broke over the kingdom of Elias as the last warship of the G8 branch base pulled away. Under direct orders from headquarters, the fleet had abandoned the kingdom the moment news arrived that all 4 of its generals had fallen. Embarrassed and defeated, they steamed off into the mist, leaving Nathan, Lafitte, Nico Robin, and a handful of others behind on the rain-slicked island. Their mission, wait until the recording device's magnetic meter filled completely, no matter how long it took. While the skies drummed against the corrugated roofs of their makeshift quarters, Nathan settled into the common room with pen and parchment. Over weeks of relentless training, he'd charted every surge of power, every fleeting insight into Conqueror's Haki. Now he distilled those raw observations into a clear, systematic dossier. When he finally rose, 4 neatly typed pages lay in his hands, far more comprehensive than the hastily scrawled notes they'd first received. Lafitte and Robin looked up as Nathan spread the pages out on the battered table. This covers everything I've learned about Conqueror's Haki, he said. I cross-referenced records salvaged from O'Hara, the island famed as the cradle of all true knowledge, and added my own practice logs. Robin leafed through the first page. You've detailed activation conditions, effects on bystanders, even the physiological toll it takes. And noted the key difference, Nathan added. While armament Haki demands rigorous conditioning, Conqueror's Haki often awakens more easily, sometimes as an inborn trait. A commanding presence can trigger it in those around you. Lafitte grinned. So our grand entrances really do stir something in others. In a manner of speaking, Nathan replied. Your reputations bolster the effect, making your Conqueror's Haki more likely to manifest, and more potent when it does. Robin paused at the margin of page 2. It says here there are 3 types of Haki: observation, armament, and Conqueror. Organizing them side by side makes their differences crystal clear. Exactly, Nithin affirmed. Once the recorder finishes charging, we'll have hard data to refine our techniques. Until then, study these pages. Mastering this knowledge could turn the tide in any fight. A crack of thunder rolled across the island as the three of them bent over the dossier. Outside, the magnetic gauge on the recorder slowly inched toward full. With every drop of rain that fell, they edged closer to unlocking a power that might reshape their destiny. Robin had already skimmed the entry on domineering. It read more like a popular science overview than a real user's guide. He flipped through the pages with that uncanny memory of his, transcribing every key detail onto a sheet of parchment in seconds. Then he slid the notes across the table to Lafitte. Lafitte picked them up, browsed the lines, and let out a low chuckle. According to this, I actually have domineering, he said, shrugging. Funny, I've never noticed using it in practice. Still, I'm not surprised you managed to absorb and apply knowledge so fast, Robin. Across the table, Nithin nodded quietly. He wasn't shocked. After all, as a member of the Blackbeard Pirates in the original timeline, he knew all too well just how many hidden talents his crewmates could possess. He'd suspected Lafitte might be able to call on some power of lore or intuition, but he'd never pressed the matter. Lafitte tucked the notes aside with a grin and began reading them over again, committing every line to memory. Even though he instinctively felt the flow of domineering power, it was still raw, full of rough edges that needed practice to smooth out. It reminded Nithin of his own awakening. His senses of sight and sound had only just unlocked, and he still struggled to control them fully. While Robin and Lafitte dissected the domineering write-up, Rhodes methodically tallied up the spoils they'd seized from the G8 branch Navy base. Nithin sat on the edge of the deck, flexing his bruised right arm. The wreck and assault on the G8 branch base at Dalmesia had gone exactly as planned. 3 major generals and even a lieutenant general had fallen under his blades, but the enemy's heavy ordnance had left his skin black and blue. Luckily, none of his muscles or bones were seriously damaged. For the past 2 days, Robin had been tending his wounds with salves and poultices, and he was practically back to full strength. He made a mental note. Next time, recruit a ship's doctor before charging into a fortified naval base. He tapped his wrist console and summoned the talent system interface. The operation at Dalmesia granted him 100 points of combat talent proficiency plus 1 free talent point. Unlike pirate hunting missions, where rewards are split among every crew member, naval victories award everything to the fleet's commanding officer, in this case, Nithin himself. His eyes flicked to the combat talents menu. Without hesitation, he allocated 10 of his newly earned proficiency points to his signature ability, the Twisted Fruit technique. A surge of golden light pulsed through the display as his proficiency jumped to 300. At the same moment, a secondary branch, Twisted Gravity, glowed green, indicating it was now available to unlock. The system tooltip read, "Requires 3 free talent points." Nithin sighed. He still needed 2 more points before he could master it. Nithin frowned. 3 free talent points was a steep price. He only had 2 left, still 1 short of unlocking Gravity Twist. He'd need even more just to bend space. From now on, he reminded himself, every free point had to be budgeted carefully. After a moment's hesitation, he set aside the Twisted Fruit skill tree and switched to the General Talents interface. 90 proficiency points remained. He tapped in 25 to physical enhancement and 50 to agility. The system immediately recalculated. Agility enhancement, 150, advanced. Physical enhancement, 260, peak. He recalled his last battle against Dalmesia. His speed had constantly lagged behind, forcing him to rely entirely on surprise moves from his Devil Fruit powers. Had Dalmesia outpaced him outright, there would have been no opening to exploit. On paper, it looked like a crushing victory, but in truth, the Navy had fumbled every decision, starting with a gross underestimation of Lafitte's combat prowess. The fleet's failure came down to 3 critical errors, any one of which a competent Navy could have avoided, and none of which Nithin would have allowed. First, the 3 major generals, reinforced by Admiral Dalmesia, chose to cooperate so closely that Nithin was forced into a fighting retreat. Faced with their combined strength, he had no choice but to withdraw. A direct engagement against all 4 commanders at once would have been suicide. Second, Two of those generals grew overconfident. They charged at Nathan head-on, certain of victory. In the ensuing clash, each suffered a grievous wound, losing an arm, and their battle effectiveness collapsed. Third, Dalmesia himself underperformed. Nathan's ruthless tactics and cutting words shattered his morale, and he never regained his composure in combat. Had any naval force corrected even one of these mistakes, had they coordinated more carefully, restrained the brash generals, or kept Dalmesia's confidence intact, they might have held the field instead of being routed and nearly wiped out. In truth, the enemy's encirclement was executed with caution. There weren't vast numbers of ships, but their overall strategy was flawed. Meanwhile, Nathan has grown far stronger than before. His agility has increased by 50 points, his physical power by 25, and his uncanny resonance, his distorted strength, by 10. Even pitted against two generals at their peak and a rallying Dalmesia, Nathan now holds the clear advantage. Nathan paused to consider his remaining 15 proficiency points. He could have poured them into physical fitness or further refined his distortion fruit power, but in truth his greatest weakness lay elsewhere. If he ever squared off against an opponent faster or strong than Dalmesia, his lack of Conqueror's Haki would leave him at a perilous disadvantage. He didn't need more speed, he just couldn't risk being utterly outmatched. Resolving his priorities, Nathan channeled all 15 points into his Conqueror's Haki. Instantly, his internal stats updated. Gunshots, 50, melee combat, 100, distortion fruit mastery, 300, Rokushiki techniques, 6 powers, 0, observation Haki, 0, armament Haki, 0, Conqueror's Haki, 15. A low rumble of power swept through him as his will hardened like steel. At the same moment, the aura of his distortion fruit, now maxed at 300, flared outward in a vast, rolling wave. The radius of his warping field leapt to nearly 100 meters, a clear sign that he'd shattered his previous limits. With his newfound Haki resting ready, Nathan felt more prepared than ever for the battles ahead. Nathan tapped through his status screen one more time, then allocated 25 points into physical prowess. The surge of distortion energy still reverberated through his limbs, and he needed every ounce of raw strength to control it. Watching the numbers climb, he wondered how he measured up against the old guard, those veteran lieutenant generals stationed at headquarters. The gap was staggering. Take Karp, for example, a freshly promoted lieutenant general who'd barely had time to settle into his new rank. He wasn't in the same league as Tao, the T-Pig, whose combat prowess bordered on that of a full general. Reaching lieutenant general was the pinnacle of many naval careers. Some officers had held the title for decades, refining their skills only incrementally. Even so, most never approached the raw power required of the true generals. Nathan had never sparred with one of headquarters' lieutenants, so he couldn't say for certain where he stood. But one fact felt unavoidable. He was still light years away from admiral level. A single naval admiral could raise an island without breaking a sweat. And when you remembered just how vast some islands could be, the sheer scale of that destructive power was terrifying. Ordinary islands must be at least 10 kilometers across. Qingji's power, by contrast, can instantly freeze the sea over an unknown area, plunging it into an ice age. Nathan's distortion ability, effective over only 100 meters, pales in comparison. In practical terms, once the Navy Admiral zeroes in on his exact position, he won't even have a chance to resist. Another island lay ahead. Time to hunt new prey. Nathan drew a slow breath, determination flickering in his dark eyes. Pirates carrying bounties over 100 million are rare in the West Sea, but on the first half of the Grand Line he'd already secured 3 major captures. There were still countless opportunities waiting out there, and he intended to seize every one of them. Chapter 79. Something big has happened. Navy headquarters. Top-level conference room. The room was cavernous and silent, lined with dark wood panels and illuminated by a single low-hanging chandelier. Only officers of vice admiral rank and above were permitted to speak. Major generals and below could attend only as observers, tasked with taking minutes and bearing witness. Fleet Admiral Sengoku sat at the head of the long table, his expression unreadable. On either side of him, the highest-ranking admirals exchanged glances, but remained motionless. After a moment's stillness, Sengoku's deep voice finally broke the quiet. "Gentlemen," he began, "we will proceed with the reorganization of the G8 branch base exactly as outlined in yesterday's briefing." He tapped a sealed folder in front of him. In addition, he slid a second dossier across the polished surface, its cover embossed with the Navy's seal. He fixed Vice Admiral Doberman with a steady stare. "Who will explain the current status of the Ghost Hand pirates? I want a full account." A collective unease rippled through the room. It had been scarcely a month since Sengoku had assumed the role of Fleet Admiral, and already an unprecedented crisis was unfolding on the high seas. The infamous Ghost Hand pirates, known for their ruthlessness and uncanny ability to vanish at will, had struck again, this time in Navy-secured waters. Doberman rose, every muscle in his frame tight with contrition. He bowed deeply, eyes cast to the floor. "Admiral, the failure lies with me," he said in a low voice. "I take full responsibility for the lapses in my command that allowed them to slip through our defenses." He sank back into his chair, shoulders heavy. The room remained tense. Sengoku's gaze never wavered as he weighed the consequences of this latest breach. The wheels of Navy justice had begun to turn. General Warring States cast a steely glance at Admiral Doberman, his deep voice echoing across the ranks of assembled lieutenant generals. "We cannot let the Navy's honor be tarnished," he declared. "If we tolerate this, criminal forces will only grow bolder. As for the Rhodes incident, after tracing every twist and turn, I'm frankly exasperated. Trying to plug one small breach after another has only led to a total collapse. There's no way we can revoke Nethin's bounty. Even if we petition the government, they'll refuse. They'll demand nothing less than erasing him from existence. And once the Navy's prestige is gone, the fallout will be catastrophic, threatening every sea lane and every port. In my view, we have no choice but to make an example of Rhodes, to uphold justice on a global scale. Yes, it's harsh, perhaps unfair to Rhodes himself, but since Nethin executed the West Sea Branch colonel, any notion of leniency disappears. Regardless of his reasons, daring to massacre one of our senior officers is an unforgivable crime." When news of the Ghost Spider incident reached Marine headquarters, Sengoku couldn't ignore it. After all, one of his major generals had been defeated. Still, he refused to handle it himself, and instead ordered Admiral Akainu to take full responsibility. As a fleet admiral, Akainu wasn't about to chase a lone pirate from the West Blue all the way to sea, so he appointed Lieutenant General Doberman to oversee the operation. Akainu's part was simple: review and approve Doberman's deployment requests and paperwork. He even signed off on mobilizing the G8 branch to encircle and suppress Nethin. No one, however, neither Doberman nor Akainu, anticipated the disaster that followed. The G8 base was overrun. Lieutenant General Doberman and 3 of his field generals were all cut down in battle. When Sengoku pressed for answers, Akainu's scowl deepened. What should have been a routine mop-up had ballooned into a full-blown catastrophe. If there were failures, they had to be corrected, immediately and without question. And all the while, the Ghost Hand Rhodes prowled the seas unchecked, brutal, relentless, and utterly without mercy. Fleet Admiral Sengoku R. apped his gavel on the conference table, instantly stilling the assembled officers. "To preserve the Navy's honor," he announced, voice echoing off the walls, "we must eliminate this threat without delay." He let the weight of his words sink in, then fixed Admiral Akainu with a steady stare. Akainu remained silent, expression unreadable. Turning next to Admiral Chingji, Sengoku's tone grew solemn. "Admiral Chingji, I'm handing this entire operation over to you. You will bear full responsibility." A tense hush fell across the room. No one dared challenge the fleet admiral's decision, but the unmistakable shift of authority was clear. Akainu's original assignment had been quietly reassigned to Chingji. Vice Admiral Doberman bowed his head, unwilling to meet any of the admiral's gazes. Chingji inclined his head once, twice, then settled into an unusually grave silence. He understood precisely why he'd been chosen. The matter of Nethin, formerly known as Ross, had spiraled into a serious breach. And with Nico Robin still at large aboard Captain Luozid's vessel, there was no room for error. All the loose ends had to be tied up swiftly. Sengoku surveyed the room with a final, measured glance. "If there are no further objections, this meeting is adjourned." But before he could dismiss them, the heavy oak doors swung open, and a breathless messenger slipped inside. "Fleet Admiral," she gasped. "Urgent report from the Grand Line." Chapter 7. The Ghost Hand's Rising Threat. Nathan was about to speak when a furious knock rattled the door. A breathless Major General burst in, clutching a fresh newspaper. "Sir, urgent news," he shouted, slamming the broadsheet onto Nathan's desk. Nathan's gaze locked onto the front page. A jolt of tension shot through his skull as he read the headline. "A pirate recruited from our own navy?" Beneath it, an entire page was devoted to the notorious Ghost Hand pirates and their elusive captain, Rhodes, better known as Ghost Hand. The article laid out their latest atrocity in the Kingdom of Elias, an ambush so devastating that the elite G8 naval battalion was wiped out. Lieutenant General Dalmesia, Major General Rohan, and Commanders Heiser and Asius all executed on the spot. This raid was far from the first. According to the report, the Ghost Hand pirates had repeatedly broken sieges, slaughtered crews, and openly challenged the Crown's fleet. Their ruthless precision had become the stuff of nightmares among naval officers. Nathan's fists clenched around the edge of the desk. What drove these ruthless marauders to such savage heights? To answer that, one must go back more than a year, back to the moment everything changed. Admiral Waring slammed his fist onto the polished conference table so hard that his knuckles went white. Blue veins stood out across his forehead. He shouldn't have called them cowards in front of the press, but now that one sensational article had been unleashed, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. A fresh stack of newspapers had just been delivered to the War Council's chambers. Each officer picked up a copy and began to read, their eyes widening in disbelief at the front page headline. Under the Navy's very own guidance, veteran pirate hunter Nathan has at last slipped into the ranks of the very outlaws he once dedicated his life to destroying. Yet astonishingly, from the West Sea all the way to the Grand Route, the Ghost Hand pirates have never razed a village or massacred innocent civilians. Every soul under their flag, once denounced as ruthless rogues, has hunted only the most murderous pirates of the evil seas. Now, the Navy itself calls them criminals. How will this rising supernova fare against the full might of His Majesty's fleet? Stay tuned. A hush fell over the room. Officers exchanged tense glances as they absorbed the stinging sarcasm of the piece. Nathan, once the Navy's proudest asset, was being recast as the Navy's greatest failure. And the Admiral, still gripping the paper, could already hear the rumble of public opinion, too, arning against him. Outside the conference hall's massive doors, a pair of guards stiffened, as if sensing the gathering storm. Within moments, Admiral Waring knew there would be no escaping the fallout from Nathan's fall, and the Navy would be forced to confront not only its former champion, but the truth behind the Ghost Hand pirates. General Nathan, known throughout the command as the Warring States, finally loses his temper. With a roar, he slams his fist into the conference table, spiderwebbing cracks across its polished surface. His other hand rips at the newspaper in front of him, shredding the pages in frustration. "Damn it," he shouts. "What kind of report is this? Who authorized it? And why in the world would the government let something like this slip into the press?" The council chamber falls completely silent. Every officer's face drains of color at his outburst, and even the most seasoned generals sit motionless, beads of sweat forming at their temples. It's clear that whatever has been published isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Nathan's voice echoes through the hall as he studies the torn newspaper, eyes blazing with anger. "This leak could cost us everything," he mutters. He looks to his staff, his expression deadly serious. "Find out how this happened, and fix it, immediately." No one dares speak. The weight of his command hangs in the air. Something has gone terribly wrong, and everyone here knows they have to act. Now. Chapter 80. Emperor Morgans of the Dark World had long nurtured a secret weapon, a fleet of radical sympathizers, covert revolutionaries, and underground journalists ready to do his bidding. Under his direction, they began printing pamphlets and newspapers detailing the astonishing exploits of the so-called Ghost Hand pirates. Though the world government and Navy reacted swiftly, seizing and shredding every printed copy they could find, the word had already spread. Even a handful of pamphlets in circulation ignited conversations in every port and on every island, from the East Blue to the New World. No amount of official censorship could stop the rumor mill. Farmers trading tales in seaside markets passed rumors on to ship captains who carried them to distant archipelagos on the next tide. Within weeks, the name Ghost Hand Pirates dominated tavern chatter and drew eager eyes to every headline, even those the Navy insisted were fabrications. At the World Government Naval Headquarters, panic reigned. Fleet Admiral Sengoku and Admiral Akinu found themselves scrambling to contain the fallout, while their superiors demanded a scapegoat. Vice Admiral Doberman nearly lost his commission, his rank only saved by Sengoku and Akinu's intervention, though most of his power was stripped away practically overnight. Meanwhile, the government's official bulletins continued to denounce the ghost hand stories as malicious slander orchestrated by dark forces to undermine the Navy's honor. Yet in every seaside village, dockworker tea houses, and high-profile conference room, the public pressed on with only one question. Who was this Rhodes, this legendary pirate who dared challenge the Marines so brazenly? And somewhere in the crowd of eager onlookers, Nethan read the latest illicit dispatch, his heart pounding at the thought of a pirate bold enough to stand toe-to-toe with the might of the world government. The game had changed, and no one, not even the Navy's top brass, knew how it would end. Nethan was a madman, but he'd managed to rile up both the world government and the Navy, and I fear that may be his undoing. On the deck of the Don Quixote family's pirate ship, Doflamingo leaned back in a deck chair, a freshly printed newspaper in hand. He flipped to the front page, then let out a low, thoughtful chuckle. As soon as we cross into the Grand Line, he mused, tapping a finger against the inked lines, we'll be pushed right into the storm's eye. Surviving will be no small feat, but if we do make it through. He trailed off, eyes alight with anticipation. Far out at sea, Dracule, Hawkeye Myhawk, stood alone on his ship's deck, one hand resting on his sword's hilt, the other raising a goblet of red wine. He, too, had a copy of the same newspaper, and he sipped thoughtfully as he read. Half a world away, in the East Blue's windmill village, the morning air was filled with the scent of baked bread and sea salt. Rakilu, meat still in one hand, newspaper in the other, bounded across the pier to Shanks's ship. "Boss, take a look at this," he called, thrusting the paper forward between bites. Shanks accepted it with a broad grin, crimson hair dancing in the breeze. He scanned the headline, eyebrows lifting. "Well, would you look at that?" he said. "Something tells me the government and the Navy are in full panic mode right now." Ben Beckman, lounging against the ship's rail beside him and holding a lit cigar, peered over Shanks's shoulder. The ember's glow cast shadows across his thoughtful gaze. "Putting news like this out on the open sea," he remarked, "takes either iron nerves or complete recklessness, or both. There are even outside powers, like the Revolutionary Army, stoking these flames. The Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Rhodes," the name tugged at Beckman's memory. When he glanced at the pirate emblem printed on the broadsheet, it all came back. That same flag had flown during their skirmish in the West Sea. This Rhodes wasn't just any pirate. He'd already be stamped with a dead or alive warrant by the world government. Once Navy wraps up its current operations, they'll rain down punishment like a thunderbolt. If Rhodes thinks he can waltz in and challenge us, he's in for a rude awakening. Beckman crumpled the newspaper, tossed it aside, and shot a wry grin at Shanks. "Still too early to worry about," he said lightly. "This whole thing feels too unreal." Across the Grand Line and beyond, every major power was buzzing about the havoc the Ghost Hand Pirates had unleashed. Some laughed at the Navy's embarrassment, others sneered at the world government's impotence, and a select few watched Rhodes with eager eyes. But unanimous sentiment held that these pirates wouldn't last long. Anger the Navy and the world government this badly, and there's no pity when they finally turn their full force on you. How terrifying would a government and Navy fully enraged really be? We don't know. Those who lived through such wrath have long since faded into history's dust. Along the jagged shore of the Kingdom of Elias, the pirate ship Ghost Shadow lay at anchor. Captain Lafitte remained on the island, waiting for the ship's magnetic storage to reach capacity, while Nico Robin had gone ashore again after Nethan's return. She plunged into Elias's subterranean world, seeking the intelligence they needed. Details on every pirate with a bounty over 100 million berries in the first half of the Grand Line. In the Ghost Shadow's spacious lounge, Nethan reclined on a cushioned sofa, eyes closed, when a soft knock at the door roused him. "Come in," he called. The door swung open to reveal Robin, dressed in a lavender tunic and shorts. Her silhouette was just as he remembered from their previous encounters, yet somehow younger, more spry. Nethan sat up, a warm smile on his face. "You're back already?" he asked. "I thought you'd be slower than Lafitte." Robin stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "After you routed the Navy," she replied, "Elias's underworld forces fell into chaos. It's much easier to slip through their nets and gather information now." Nethan's grin widened. "Excellent. Lay it all out for me." Robin set down her satchel and pulled out a rolled parchment. "Here's everything I found so far," she said, unfurling it across the low table between them. Names, last known locations, even snippets of correspondence. We're closing in on our next big score. As Robin detailed her discoveries, Nethan leaned forward, anticipation lighting his eyes. Their hunt was far from over, and with the Navy still licking its wounds, the time for bold moves had never been better. Robin stepped across the deck toward Nethan. "In the first half of the Grand Line," she began, "there are 7 pirates, including you, Captain, whose bounties exceed 100 million berries. We've just compiled detailed reports on each of them." "Including me?" Nethan raised an eyebrow. With a faint tilt of her head, Robin smiled and laid 2 wanted posters on the low table before him. One bore Nethan's name and a 200 million berry bounty. The other showed Navigator Lafitte, marked at 80 million berries. "Your bounty has doubled," Robin noted softly. "And with Lafitte's, the total for our crew now stands at 359 million berries. If you continue to prove your strength in future skirmishes, your rewards will climb even higher. But as our intelligence officer, try to keep a low profile during battles whenever possible." Nethan picked up his wanted poster and studied it, his lips curling into a wry smile. He tucked the paper under his arm. The more discreet the better, he thought, especially if it protected the most conspicuous woman on their ship. Robin nodded and laid a stack of dossiers and bounty notices on the table. "Here," she said, "are the profiles of the 6 pirates on the first half of the Grand Line, with bounties over 100 million berries, excluding Nethan, of course." Nethan flipped through the papers. Some profiles were surprisingly detailed, while others barely contained a name. 2 reports offered no location data at all, and of the remaining 4, Anlo, Y2, included precise coordinates. He set aside the 4 that lacked actionable intelligence and turned his attention to the promising pair. The first described a 230 million berry bounty on Ren Bloodwolf, captain of the Bloodwolf pirates, last seen in the Seven-Water Archipelago half a month ago. Nethan frowned. That was too far off course. He'd only just reached the second island of the Pluton route, and Seven-Water lay near the Chambord Islands, well beyond his immediate reach. He placed the dossier aside. He picked up the final document and studied it intently. Nethan folded the newspaper, his eyes narrowing at the line he'd just read. A 180 million belly bounty on the Iron Wall pirates, who had descended upon Port Alpha 7 days ago. A flicker of recognition passed through him. Port Alpha lay along the Pruiton route, just a stone's throw from the kingdom of Elias. Normally, a log pose on the Grand Line locks you onto a single course, but with an eternal pose fixed to another island, a ship can detour or even sail backward. Rhodes's vessel already carried an eternal pose keyed to Elias. You could never have too many navigational trump cards. He tapped the article before him. Robin's intelligence files had flagged the Iron Wall pirates, Captain Iron Wall Lavallo, as a devil fruit user with barrier-forming powers. That ability placed him among the top echelons of New World devil fruits, and Robin warned it would only grow more lethal over the next decade. Unless they took Lavallo down now, he'd pose a catastrophic threat in the coming war. Nethan slid the paper across the table. "Robin's reports are thorough," he said, "but this newspaper has the clearest summary of the Iron Wall pirates' movements. We'll need every scrap of information if we're going to stop Lavallo before he becomes unbeatable." Just as Nethan was finalizing his plans to make the Iron Wall pirates his next quarry, Robin interrupted his reverie and slapped a newspaper down on the desk between them. Nathan glanced up, picked it up, and froze. The bold headline made his eyes go wide. "Well," he murmured, "this is beyond anything I imagined. Once this reaches the wider seas, it's going to spin everything out of control." Robin's face grew serious. "The Navy and the government will be furious. If they move to quash this, it'll turn into a slaughter. Our heads'll be at risk." For a long moment, Nathan simply stared at the paper. Then he set it down, chuckling low. "And yet, don't you feel it? A kind of exhilaration. Imagine the chaos when every ship out there sees these allegations. Sure, we lose control of the narrative, but it's like stumbling across a latrine when you're collapsing from dysentery in the baking sun. Utter salvation." He grinned up at Robin. "Admit it, Captain, this is a thrill." Robin's eyes flickered with unease. The truth was finally laid bare, but what came next might be more dangerous than any battle they'd faced. Nathan stared at the map spread across the cabin table, a grim realization settling over him. Their hard-won victory over the G8 branch base, the triumph that had finally secured the Ghost Hand pirates a firm foothold on the Grand Line, was about to evaporate. The Navy and the world government would not stand idly by. When they struck next, it would be with overwhelming force, a thunderous, all-out assault designed to wipe the Ghost Hand pirates off the face of the sea.